This story began one fine evening when a girl who was dressed incredibly beautifully entered the hospital room where a lot of people had already gathered. People there were talking among themselves. They were discussing the latest rumors. One of the men said that he meant that very rumor about one incredible person about whom the public world has been talking a lot lately. It was a rumor about the girl that absolutely everyone in the empire knew. Her name was Lady Iris. As soon as the men heard that he meant Lady Iris, they weren't even surprised. They remembered that they had indeed heard a lot of rumors about this person recently. However, not everyone was aware of this, and one of his friends asked if she had really done something grandiose again. The man replied that he didn't know for sure. However, he decided to tell. What was this rumor about? This rumor was about the real heiress of the Duke's house, Iris. It was this woman who had the best minds of the empire and untold wealth. She was a truly majestic person. She was the most beautiful in the whole world and was admired by absolutely every man in the empire. However, Iris was also the most dangerous and the one who kept sharp thorns within herself. And it was at that moment that this beautiful lady came to this event. The men who were just gossiping about it saw Lady Iris and immediately fell silent because they understood that she could easily hear them. The girl, meanwhile, looked at them with surprise. In fact, at that moment, the lady was the most discussed figure in high society and even in politics. Her name was Natalie Iris, and some say that the lady is looking for a husband in order to become even more influential. One of the men approached Natalie and asked, "Is this really why she had just arranged a selection of candidates for the role of husband? And this event was such a place." The man asked if this was really true, and everyone around immediately fell silent as soon as they heard this. They were eagerly awaiting an answer from Natalie herself because they were very interested. The girl thought about it at that moment. However, after that, the blonde lady, who had incredibly beautiful pink eyes, grinned and said that it was really true. In fact, this girl was planning a marriage in order to get out of this reverse harem. One of the men who heard this news immediately came closer to her and smiling happily. He said that she was incredibly generous. Natalie was completely uninterested in the people who surrounded her. However, the man continued to speak and said that she gave everyone an equal chance to become her husband, and it was truly noble of her. Men really wanted to get this girl for themselves, and in fact, they considered that even just seeing her face in person was incredible luck for them, and becoming her husband was just amazing. In fact, just recently, all these people around were pointing their fingers at her, calling her a poisonous toadstool and a crow. However, now they were all blinded by her radiance and flattered until they were hoarse. And all because Natalie was now a completely different person. She had not only a different appearance, but also a different character. Such people were not the reason why the girl wanted to get married. The reason why she was really going to do it was even unknown to her family. Only Natalie herself knew. The girl, meanwhile, handed a glass of wine to the man who admired her the loudest and said that applications would be accepted the next day. Then he would be able to show what he was capable of. Moment the adopted daughter of the ducal house suddenly ran up to Natalie. Her name was Sharon. She turned to her sister and told her to stay a little longer. When the girl stopped and looked at Sharon, she immediately said that her father and older brother had not yet given their consent. So she believed that Natalie was too hasty in giving people false expectations. Natalie, meanwhile, responded to her sister that she had simply misunderstood her and that this was precisely the reason she had gotten the completely wrong impression. Sharon was very surprised when she heard about this and immediately asked her sister what exactly she had misunderstood. Well, the girl then smiled and replied that she didn't need anyone's permission. She was looking for a husband for herself and not for her father or brother. At that moment, Natalie's voice was incredibly serious. She moved closer to the girl and said this directly into her ear so that no one else could hear and so that Sharon would understand this information perfectly. The sister, hearing this, immediately became a little sad because she could not allow herself to behave like this. However, she told Natalie that this was indeed the case and asked for forgiveness for the fact that she had misunderstood everything. After this, Sharon looked up and saw some aristocrats who, having seen and heard all this information, began to laugh loudly and smile. The girl quickly approached them and greeted the ladies and said that since they had already come to the banquet, they should enjoy the atmosphere and not eavesdrop on other people's conversations. However, at that moment, her sister came up to her from behind and said in a quiet voice that she was going to go to her father because she had already asked about everything. She immediately asked for forgiveness and said that she was just about to leave. However, when she turned to the side, she saw that her half-sister had already left and pretended as if nothing had happened. In fact, Natalie, a girl who already had absolutely everything in that world, had only one reason for getting married. And the reason was that she had special people, because of whom she made this decision, and now they finally appeared in the banquet hall. A blonde man who was half naked approached the girl and said that she had posted an ad looking for a husband and asked if it was true. Natalie smiled and said that this was indeed the case. She also decided to finally try to get married. This is an honest, open competition for suitors without any hidden intentions. Meanwhile, some of the men who were standing behind this guy immediately started to rejoice at this. They were really happy that the competition was supposed to be fair, so they were ready to fight. In fact, Natalie was very surprised when she heard about this. She expected a completely different effect. She did not understand why all the people were so happy when they heard this. The girl didn't understand. Did they really think that she started this out of jealousy and a desire to receive a marriage proposal? The handsome blonde man smiled and extended his hand to Natalie and said that he had long suspected something was wrong. All the women knew that he was a womanizer, but for some reason only one girl remained with him. This guy asked, did this really mean that Natalie had removed everyone else from the road for the sake of her victory? In fact, this man was the crown prince, and the girl had a small window that showed the level of sympathy. But as soon as the girl heard these terrible words, she did not understand at all what he meant. And the most important thing was, why say such things? However, at that moment, another man approached her. It was a dark-haired, handsome man. She also had a sympathy window above his head. It was at maximum. Smiling happily, the man said that he guessed that he thought she had some reason when she called him a monster. This man was a self-hater, a cruel duke from the north. Natalie tried to explain to them that this was not so. However, a red-haired man appeared behind him, who also decided to have his say. The man smiled happily and said in a quiet voice that if she had tamed him, then one could say that she was already a sister. He also said that she herself said that if you cry and cling, you can win a woman's heart. At that moment, his hair color suddenly changed dramatically. He turned blue. This person was Crybaby, this psychopath, the Lord of the Dark Tower. The level of sympathy was also at its maximum. The man hugged her around the neck and in a quiet voice, continuing to cry, asked why she was looking at other people at all. He thought that she could only be with him. In fact, it was a reverse harem game world where you had to conquer male characters, and it was the most fashionable version, and Natalie was really delighted with this update. In order to exit the game, it was necessary to fill the love scales of all the main characters to a certain level, and when the maximum percentage was reached, the final scene was launched with one of them. However, Natalie, even after fulfilling all the conditions, encountered some incomprehensible error, and neither the ending nor the exit from the game were activated in the end for her. Of course, the girl was not happy about this at all. She thought about the fact that before starting the game, she needed to install the update properly. After all, there was a special ending where everyone lived together, but now she didn't have that. Of course, she assumed that perhaps the problem and the mistake lay in the excessive sympathy of the main characters. And then a truly brilliant idea came to her mind. Natalie believed that if she married someone else, then perhaps she would finally be able to escape from this world. In this game, male characters' affection levels dropped when they were jealous or felt cheated. Therefore, the idea was to marry not one of the three, but someone else and sharply reduce their sympathy. She believed that in this case, she would be able to achieve what she wanted. However, Natalie also had an older brother. His name was Anatoly, and as soon as he found out that the girl had announced a competition for suitors, he did not understand at all why she suddenly decided to get married. The man thought that she was incredibly naive and did not understand anything about life, and also did not understand how she could be so stubborn and not listen to people who were really right in this situation. In the end, besides the fact that the three main characters had already gone crazy from Natalie's obsession, she also had a brother who had previously only done this by being angry with her. And now he suddenly decided to take care of her fate. When she met her brother and he lectured her, she didn't understand. Wasn't it really him who dreamed of getting rid of this worthless burden? However, for some reason, now he was very worried about the decisions she had made. However, at that moment, her father also spoke up. He agreed with Anatoly. He told her not to get married and to stay at home. He believed that in this way, she would squander her father's inheritance as she pleased until the end of her days. In the end, even the father who used to look at Natalie like a stone now had no intention of letting her go, but decided to cling to her in every possible way. The girl left the room to be alone for a while. She fell to the ground and did not understand at all how everything had come to this point. When she returned to her estate in the evening, she thought that she had had enough. She could no longer tolerate all this. Natalie decided that she was very tired of even trying to change anything. She believed that it didn't matter at all how much she tried to be loved by someone. It was all already useless. She understood that the rest of the nobles were simply making fun of her for wearing a wig and simply trying to be a copy of her sister Sharon. The girl was constantly subjected to ridicule and bullying, and on top of that, her family despised her and did not pay any attention to her at all. The girls really didn't like all this, and for this reason, she went out onto the balcony and stood on the very edge. Natalie had sad thoughts about this. She believed that in the end, no one would ever love her again. She also thought about the fact that on that day when this inexplicable so-called luck came to her, she secretly hoped that everything would really change in her life and she would find true happiness. However, in the end, Natalie did not receive anything that could change her life. On the contrary, it became even worse. Therefore, the girl could no longer endure all this. Natalie looked at the full moon that illuminated her path and thought that this world was just as terrible as her previous one. So she didn't see any way out of all this. In fact, the first time she encountered such luck was when she went to buy a hat at Madame Dupree's shop. At that time, she still had dark hair and people really avoided her and thought that she could curse them. However, the saleswoman was quite kind to Natalie and brought her the limited edition hat that the girl so desperately wanted. The saleswoman happily smiled and gave her this headdress and said that she had been waiting for it for several years, and now she finally had such a piece, and she was happy to tell her this news. However, after that, her voice suddenly became a little rough, and he said that Natalie even paid for her share to include them in the pre-order list. But the girl did not pay attention to what the saleswoman was showing her. She saw a more interesting thing and asked how much the thing she pointed to cost. The saleswoman, seeing it, was a little surprised. She asked for forgiveness from Madame and said that this hat was simply a sample made by Madame Duparry, namely her small, neat hat with a bow she was holding in her hands. She replied that since it was only a sample, it had little commercial value, and also asked if Natalie preferred the limited edition hat that she had dreamed of for so long. But the girl replied that in fact she didn't want it anymore. She explained that she would take this black sample, which she liked much better. Another saleswoman, hearing this, was very surprised and told the lady that the store had a rule that you could only buy one hat per person, and she thought that Natalie wanted to buy two of them. Natalie explained that she was going to buy just one black hat, so she asked for it to be wrapped for her as soon as possible. Of course, the saleswomen were genuinely surprised. They couldn't believe that she had made such a choice for herself, but they had no other choice, so even after a little persuasion, Natalie still got the hat. When they gave her the groceries, the maid who accompanied the girl asked why Natalie did this. Because after 3 years of waiting for the limited edition, she went and chose something incredibly strange and cheap. However, the girl replied that in fact she felt exactly the same as this thing, and that was the reason she chose it. As soon as the maid heard this, she realized that there was no point in asking her any more questions, so she did not say anything more to her mistress. In fact, Natalie still didn't know why she did it. It was just that little black hat that was simple that attracted her, and she felt that she had to take it at that moment. The girl, even after some time, realized that it was as if the hat itself was asking to be chosen. After that incident, several days passed, and the girl was sitting in her gazebo as always at lunchtime, drinking tea. And suddenly her assistant turned to the girl and said that she probably wouldn't believe all of this. However, she had some pretty amazing news. The woman stood up and said that yesterday there was a fire in Madame de Paris' shop, and everything burned down to the ground. Absolutely nothing was left. When Natalie heard this, she was a little surprised. In fact, the news was really shocking. The girl could not believe that this could really happen. But soon she found out that it really was true. A strong fire turned the entire store into a real oven, and not a single product could be saved there. It also soon became clear that the black hat that the clerk had called a simple sample was in fact a real limited edition item and was indeed very precious. And since the store has now disappeared, this hat that Natalie kept was the only one left in the world. Of course, the girl regretted Madame de Paris. However, she herself believed that she was quite lucky, and for this reason she was happy that everything turned out this way. This was not the only piece of luck that Natalie had. In fact, after the unfortunate incident, the genius Madame du Barry announced her retirement. She was no longer going to make any clothes, much less hats. And for this reason, Natalie became the very last owner of the masterpiece that Madame du Barry made, so it became even more valuable than it was before. When the girl found herself at one of the nearest events, she decided to wear this very headdress, and the people around her whispered, discussing that she was very lucky. Not everyone could have such luck. Thus, Natalie became the most talked about person in the city. She was even invited to a party on Needle Road. The one who met her first said that since the girl was participating in the races for the first time, he asked why I didn't bet on the same horse that he did. He told Natalie that there was a great racehorse at the races that day, and he had bet on her, believing that she had every chance of winning. Meanwhile, the horse was brought out onto the field. He said that it was the white horse he had spoken about. He had heard that even professional players from abroad were betting their money on it. Smiling, he asked the girl if he had ever seen how energetic the horse was, and he also said that it definitely had to be a champion and asked the girl's opinion on this matter. But Natalie looked at the other horse, which was brown and stood at the very end, and asked what had happened to her. After all, for some reason, she couldn't even stand up on her feet. The man immediately looked at this poor girl and said that he looked rather fragile and no one paid attention to him. So he said that he was afraid that if the girl put her money on him, he would definitely lose. After that, he continued to insist on his own and said that he believed that she just needed to trust him and place her bet on the white horse, then she would definitely be able to win and win something good for herself. But Natalie said that in fact she was now thinking about betting on this very brown horse, and she didn't want to listen to what the man thought about it at all. The guy smiled and told the lady that he absolutely did not understand why to make such a stupid bet when the result of the race was already in front of everyone. Everyone understood the outcome, but for some reason she decided to do something else. He explained that he didn't want to insist on his own just because he had a big ego, but in reality he was just trying to save the girl from total loss, because with this brown horse she was exactly in for shame. Meanwhile, some of the ladies who were standing around began to whisper among themselves. They thought that Natalie was very stubborn and could not understand whether she really needed attention so desperately that she even had to go to such measures. One of the aristocrats said that you yourself that week she should have known when Natalie started to dye her hair the same color as Lady Sharon that the girl was not like everyone else and would only follow her sister. But Natalie, having heard all these phrases perfectly well, did not react to this at all. She only turned to the man and asked if they could start already because she would like to see the final result. Then the man gave the signal to the guides that the race could begin, and the horses immediately rushed forward as soon as they heard a loud sound. Natalie thought that she had once again made some rather impulsive choice, because of which she had been very worried at the time, not understanding why she had even said and bet on this horse. All these aristocrats standing behind her were whispering and talking about her. The girl decided that if she had retreated then, she would have been a real laughingstock. Eventually, some time passed from that moment, and finally one of the horses came running to the start, and this horse turned out to be the very one that Natalie had placed her bet on. As soon as the man saw the results of the races, he was very indignant. He turned to the girl and asked how she could even know that this particular horse was supposed to win, since it looked the weakest of all. He also said in a surprised voice that he thought that it was her first time at the races, and that she definitely couldn't guess all this. But Natalie said that in fact it was all just that she just liked the appearance of this horse, and for this reason she chose it. Of course, everyone around was surprised, including the aristocrats who talked about the girl behind her back and discussed her entire life situation. The horse that Natalie chose turned out to be a very rare wild stallion, and after that, the nobles who had once mocked her instantly changed their attitude towards the girl because they realized that she was not such a simpleton as they thought. They even started calling the girl a new nickname. They gave her the nickname Lightning of Luck because recently she had been really lucky quite often. In the end, the girl still gave up on that terrible thought that she had in her head that evening. She didn't jump off the balcony, but returned to her room the next morning and decided to write a letter. She saw the letter that came to her and was surprised that these people who wrote to her really wanted to pretend as if they cared about it. However, of all the invitations that Natalie had received since her debut, this could have been the biggest catch for her. So the girl seriously thought about accepting their offer. Natalie took off her shoes that were squeezing her feet quite a bit and lay down on the bed. She thought that, of course, this was not genuine goodwill. However, she did not hate it, so this was already a success. The girl had many more similar letters and offers on her bed. Of course, she was already starting to get tired of all this. However, she simply had no choice. The girl had to read them and respond. In fact, up until this point, all this attention and blessing belonged to Sharon. However, everything suddenly changed, and the girls did not like it very much. Natalie spent her life in the shadow of her sister and was quite happy with this role. However, suddenly when she found luck, everyone around her began to treat her differently. Although, of course, there were people who thought that she did not deserve all this. However, the chance to be loved as much as Shara was loved does not come often. So the girl believed that she had to appreciate it. So the girl decided that she had no right to just give up. She reached for the next letter and read it. It interested Natalie quite a lot. All because it said that the ideal party was approaching, to which the girl had just been invited, and she was thinking about actually attending it. A whole week had passed since then, but in fact Natalie continued to have dark hair, but she hid it behind a wig so that there would be as little attention to her as possible, and she also thought that it suited her better. In fact, this day was the day of the Viscount Ratings Masquerade Ball, so the girl was very happy because she always loved to wear masks, and this time she had prepared a beautiful one for herself. Masquerade night, Natalie could be absolutely anyone she wanted, and therefore she even bought a new dress and shoes, especially for this night, in order to be simply unimaginable. It was a beautiful long red dress that very well emphasized the color of her eyes. In fact, she received many different invitations to dinner parties and tea parties, but she decided to choose this particular party, and all because it was an exclusive event that was organized by a prestigious family and open only to a few select people. She thought that if it was a rafing party, then even her father and brother wouldn't object, and that meant that she could at least spend the evening in peace. I even thought that perhaps if I was sociable enough, I would be able to make useful connections for myself. Natalie really thought that this event was perfect for her, and they were also supposed to have a special auction, so she was interested in attending it, and maybe she could buy some of the lots for herself. However, when the girl approached the window, she saw that it had started to rain quite heavily, and she thought that this was all very strange, because just a minute ago, it had been clear and sunny. The girl was very upset, and all because she suddenly felt this terrible premonition of something dangerous, and the girl could not cope with this premonition. It arose in her at any moment and did not stop for some time. But even despite all this, she thought that she had already sent her application for an invitation. Therefore, if she retreated now, people would laugh at her. Therefore, the girl, despite the bad weather and terrible premonition, was ready to go there. Natalie thought that on top of everything else, the mere thought of going was starting to irritate her, and she didn't know what was going on. As the storm intensified along with her bad feeling, Natalie realized that she didn't want to go anywhere anymore. So she left the dress standing to the side without putting it on and lay down on the bed. The girl was very upset because she knew that all this happened only because of the thoughts in her head. During the day she was fine, but on a rainy night they always made her feel very unpleasant. On evenings like these, Natalie couldn't stay alone. Her thoughts were eating her up from the inside, and the girl couldn't hide from them anywhere. They were everywhere. And on every such rainy day, Natalie has a dream of a little girl in an unfamiliar place who cries pitifully in the rain. That's exactly how she feels, and for this reason, she can't do anything about it. When Natalie falls asleep on such evenings, she dreams about this girl. She doesn't know who she is and only understands that she is very scared and lonely. Of course, Natalie feels very sorry for her, but she can't help her in any way. Because of this, the girl felt even more helpless. Then suddenly in her sleep, she smelled some strange smell. When the girl opened her eyes, she immediately saw that the door was slightly open for some reason. She thought that perhaps something was burning, and immediately the thought came to her mind that their mansion was burning. She suddenly tried to get up. However, she felt a sharp pain in her hand on this line. She understood when she managed to damage it, and this made her panic even more. The girl then heard that there was complete silence in the mansion, and this alarmed her even more. She did not understand how it could be so quiet when there was a fire in the estate. She believed that people should run out or, on the contrary, shout louder so that everyone would wake up and be saved. With difficulty, but she still managed to get to her feet. She thought that this overwhelming feeling of fear had grown even more in her, and as soon as she left the room, she saw something terrible. Her brother and father appeared in front of Natalie. They were both killed. The girl could not believe that this was really true. She cried loudly and wanted to help somehow, but she could not. She could not even move from the spot. For a while, the girl just stood and looked at their paths. However, eventually she opened her eyes and realized that it was just a terrible dream. Natalie had a strong fever because of this nightmare, and also an accelerated heartbeat. Her hands were shaking. She thought that all this introduction was too realistic for a simple dream. For this reason, the girl did not leave him without attention. However, she suddenly began to have a severe headache. She tried to understand what was happening to her when suddenly the door to the room opened. Her brother came in. He turned to Natalie and was very surprised that she had been in her room all this time, since he had already intended to turn to her more than once, but thought that she had left. The girl was a little surprised when she saw her brother, but I still remember that nightmare. She said that she just fell asleep for a bit, and for that reason she didn't hear him calling her. Then the guy asked if she really was asleep, and also asked if it was true that she didn't go to that masquerade party. He needed to know the answer clearly. The guy suggested that she could have simply returned from there. However, Natalie said that she was ready to swear that she remained in her room and slept the whole time. She saw how scared he was and immediately asked what was going on. Why was he terrified and trying to figure out where she was? Then the brother said through tears that at the masquerade that Natalie was going to, they found an unknown prohibited substance. As soon as the girl heard this, she was very shocked. She asked what he was saying. His shock gradually began to pass. He explained to the girl that everyone present at that masquerade was arrested and thrown into prison. The man also looked Natalie straight in the eye and said that drugs were prohibited by imperial law, so all those people who were present there would be punished for treason. At that moment, Natalie thought about all the good luck that had been following her lately. It all started with that unique designer hat that was released in a limited edition. After that, she made a crazy amount of gold coins on horse racing, betting on the most unremarkable horse without even hoping for anything. But now, on top of all those successes, she had avoided a cruel accusation of cheating at the party she was actually going to. The girl could not believe that all this was really just a coincidence. But then she thought for a while about the dream she had seen and immediately wondered if it was some kind of omen for her. The girl turned to her brother with a trembling voice. She took his hand and said that they must leave this place immediately. Natalie tried to warn him that if they didn't run away immediately, there would be great danger. However, the man seemed to have gone crazy. The man threw her hand aside and asked if she had finally managed to achieve what she wanted. He looked at her with great hatred and asked what kind of mess she had made, and most importantly, why. The girl, meanwhile, did not understand anything at all. She said that she did absolutely nothing and asked why he spoke like that at all. But the man, meanwhile, said that she sent a letter stating that she would definitely come to this party. Natalie was very upset. She immediately told her brother that everything was completely wrong. She sent her answer to Viscount Rainfill before and not to that scoundrel who also had a similar name for the party. Her brother did not believe her words at all. He asked how she could explain in that case that their letter was found in this man's office. He did not understand who was trying to deceive him, and this made the man even more angry. He didn't even let Natalie say a word. He said that because of her, his father and he were summoned to the capital of the empire. Now they were the main suspects, and all this was only because of the girl. Natalie couldn't believe that it was really true. She thought that there must have been some kind of mistake, but in fact, she told the butler to be responsible for all invitations from dangerous people. She gave him all those invitations that were not needed or that she considered really very dangerous for him and told him to deal with them himself. Of course, the girl could not even imagine that everything could turn out this way. She turned to her brother and said that she did not understand that it was a rainfield, but the man was not going to listen to her. He came closer to her and said that it was obvious to him that the girl was one of those people who silently accepted such invitations and then tried to make themselves out to be innocent victims. The girl was very alarmed and outraged by this fact, but the man asked why she always so desperately wanted to get into trouble. He did not understand why she could not live peacefully for at least a day. Natalie, who came to the window at the time, said that she could not believe that he really meant that she had secretly taken this invitation. The girl tried her best to make a surprised face, but at that moment the device realized that there was something wrong, which is why it reached straight for the girl's hair. He very quickly grabbed and took off her wig, after which the man asked Sharon how long she was going to pretend, but in fact it was really not Natalie, but her sister who decided to ruin the girl's life. At that moment, the girl who was actually Natalie thought that her brother didn't even know what this wig meant to her. She thought about the fact that the man knew absolutely nothing, and at that moment a memory from the past suddenly came to her mind. At that time, the girl was still very small. Her mother, who had always been fragile, died when she was about 3 years old, and then she was left alone with her brother and father. It was very difficult for her to grow up like this. However, one day a dark-haired girl came to her and said hello to Natalie. The girl looked at the stranger in surprise and thought that her mother's last wish was for them to take care of her orphaned friend's child, and that child was Sharon. When she first appeared at the estate, Natalie had absolutely no idea who she was or what she was doing there. At that moment, the girl already had a cunning plan in mind. She said that her name was Sharon and she was the same age as Natalie. After that, she suggested that they help each other. Because Natalie was heartbroken, she still agreed to it, and from that day on, the family had 2 official daughters, and Sharon slowly began to take away everything that should have belonged to Natalie. She began to communicate quite closely with her brother Anatoly, asking him to teach her a lot of new things and also pretending that she sincerely cared about her new father. When Sharon really began to be loved by everyone very much, she became adored throughout the palace, and her father quickly got used to the idea that he now had 2 daughters. Natalie, who noticed such a special forgiveness towards the girl, was very upset because neither her father nor her brother Anatoly had ever addressed her in such a way, and because of this, she felt very sad. Ultimately, the girl tried her best to please them because she also wanted to be loved as much as Sharon was. However, over time, rather strange things began to happen. For example, one day a valuable vase that belonged to the Duke broke, and the maid immediately thought that Natalie had done it. Of course, the girl was very surprised then. She immediately said that it was not she who did this at all. After all, a minute ago when she passed by, the vase was safe and sound. But the maid, of course, did not believe her. She told the girl never to do something like that again, because they would be very severely scolded for doing that. Natalie didn't understand what had happened at the time. And in the end, the more she tried, the worse everything around her became. When she tried to help the servants, she only made more mistakes, and even a shopping trip to get out of the way ended with accusations of theft. Natalie did not understand at all why everything was happening this way. And then one day when her father returned from his trip, Natalie came to him and asked how his trip went in general, but the first thing the man asked the girl was what she had done this time. Sharon didn't get up to scold her either. She told her little sister that whatever she did wrong, if she explained, she was sure that she would be forgiven, so she just needed to accept the situation as it was. But Natalie actually wanted justice, because she hadn't done anything like that, so she just asked her sister with irritation in her voice what it was saying, and also said that it all really irritated her. Of course, Anatoly immediately took the side of his new half-sister and asked Natalie how she could even say such a thing to her dear Sharon. He even pushed her. The girl almost fell, but miraculously managed to stand on her feet. After that, he turned to Sharon and said that they would definitely scold the girl a little later and asked her not to let this situation upset her because he was very worried that she would be sad. Sharon pretended that it really affected her very much, so she said that everything was fine and that she was already used to it. Although this was not the case at all, and everything was completely different. Anatoly had already turned to his father and said that they could not do everything so that it would continue. They needed to find some other way. But as soon as his father heard this, he immediately became very angry. He slammed his hand on the table and asked if the guy had completely forgotten what they had been talking about recently. The man then looked away from him and, lowering his head, told father that of course he had not forgotten anything and also asked for forgiveness for having said such a thing at all. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread throughout the empire. One day when Natalie was passing by one of the boutiques, she heard aristocrats talking about her. One of the women asked her friends if they knew that the men of Aean were chosen by the god of light in order to possess an aura of light. However, Lady Natalie had no ability or power at all. The girl had already been through a lot lately, but these horrible comments towards her only added to her pain. One of the aristocrats laughed loudly and said that they should also remember that the late Duchess had the same green eyes as Sharon. Therefore, they were already beginning to have some doubts. The ladies began to assume that it was not Sharon who was installed, but Natalie, and as soon as the girl heard this, she was very shocked. She could not believe that people could really think that way. She believed that it didn't matter how much she was ignored or mistreated. Natalie couldn't give up her desire to be loved as much as Sharon was, and was willing to do anything for that. Natalie knew perfectly well that black hair would definitely not suit her. However, she bought a wig and thought that perhaps they would then start to treat her as well as Sharon. Now, when Anatoly found out the truth and tore off her wig, he was very angry, but this line could believe that he really decided to ruin her only salvation in the whole world. She started yelling at her brother. However, suddenly the two of them heard another voice. It belonged directly to Sharon, who entered the room. The girl asked her brother for forgiveness and said that it was all her mistake. There was a separate invitation, and she thought that the butler had missed it. Sharon made a very worried expression and said that was why she had combined the invitations. However, it turned out that they were supposed to be returned. After that, she turned to Natalie and sincerely asked her for forgiveness. She said that she did not know that because of her, the girl could suffer. As soon as Natalie heard this, she was very shocked. She could not believe that all of this was not even her fault. It was all Sharon's fault, and she was just taken and brazenly scolded. But at that moment, Anatoly approached the girl and, stroking her head, said in a gentle voice that it was just a mistake. In any case, she should have double-checked the sender, and for this reason, she should be held responsible for her actions. Natalie, meanwhile, thought that her mistake was a lie. However, Sharon's mistake is beautiful, so it's just a mistake. She couldn't believe that her brother really had such a very strange logic on this matter. So, in the end, she couldn't stand it. The girl started yelling at her brother and asked why Anatoly was the father and everyone in that house. Why they were only kind to Sharon and so cold to their own child. The girl said that Sharon's mistakes were normal. However, she didn't understand why. If she made a mistake, it would be the end of the world. Natalie really couldn't believe that there was special treatment for that girl. Sharon, for even more persuasiveness, even shed a few tears, and in the meantime, he suddenly said in a cold voice that he did not expect anything more from Natalie. And as soon as the girl heard this, she was surprised, but Anatoly continued. He told the girl to stay in her room and think until the issue was finally resolved, and he decided to leave. Sharon, who was standing opposite her at the time, told Natalie not to take it out on her brother too much, since he was only scolding her because he was taking care of the girl in this way. As soon as Natalie heard this senseless excuse, she even laughed. The girl could not believe that Sharon could really say such a phrase, because it was absolutely untrue. At that moment, the laughter went away, and Natalie was furious. She started yelling at her sister and said that he was her brother and not Sharon, and this was her family, her home, and none of this belonged to Sharon. Meanwhile, the girl demonstratively fell to the ground, pretending that it was Natalie who had pushed her. And at that moment, the maid came in and saw this. She immediately ran up to her mistress and asked what had happened. Meanwhile, Sharon had finally gotten to her feet and asked Natalie to calm down and listen to her. The maid, who was frightened by the whole situation, turned to her mistress and said that she thought it would be better to just leave the place so it would be safer for both of them. Eventually, Sharon listened to her and decided to leave, leaving Natalie alone with her thoughts, and she was crushed. The girl burst into tears and thought that she no longer wanted to live at all. She simply did not see any point in it and believed that life certainly could not become better. Then she saw that the door to the balcony was open and went there. The girl looked at the full moon and thought that in the end, nothing would change. No one would appreciate or respect her. Natalie actually believed that it made absolutely no difference whether she had locked herself in that room during the monster's attack or died right then and there of her own free will. Natalia knew that absolutely no one loved her anyway, ever. Therefore, she just wanted to be loved at least once. At that moment, she was already going to take the final step forward and end her life. But at that moment, a blurry silhouette of a man suddenly appeared behind Natalie. He turned to the girl and said that everyone's favorite daughter, whom I listened to absolutely everyone, and also a daughter who was like a black sheep, So it's quite obvious who people will begin to prefer for communication and respect. Natalie believed that having one real daughter would be enough for them, so they wouldn't even feel her loss. In the end, she would just finally give people what they want, and it was for this reason that the girl was serious about taking that step. However, this silhouette suddenly asked the girl if she had really forgotten absolutely everything. Natalie looked at the unfamiliar silhouette in surprise and thought that it was some kind of ghost. However, this voice said that it was surprising for her to realize the fact that the girl did not even remember that this world was not real at all. Results. As soon as Natalia heard these words, she was very shocked. She took a few steps back and was already thinking about whether these words were really true and whether she needed to jump at all. At that moment, Natalia said that she probably really had completely forgotten about it, and now when this voice said that this was all unreal life, she began to remember little by little. The girl realized the fact that she was not a real living character. She was just a player, and this world was not real. This was the world of the game she was playing. It was indeed true that this whole incident started with a reverse harem game. When the girl downloaded this game, she was eager to find out who was supposed to be her main male character that she would eventually fall in love with. She was truly obsessed with this game, and eventually she memorized the entire script, and she even took first place in the ranking, and this continued for several years. However, something unusual happened. Then Natalie noticed that for some reason, she dropped to second place in just one night, considering the fact that she had held the first place for many years. The girl was very upset. She thought that it was very unfair because she spent an incredibly large amount of time playing this game over and over again. When she saw that she was lowered in the rating, she was very upset. She did not understand why everything was always taken away from her, and she thought about whether she could not at least have a game for herself. Then suddenly a small notification appeared which said that the full version had been released. The girl was very surprised when she saw it because she thought that she had already completed the full version of this game. This notification, of course, caught her attention. She thought that she should try to play this version of the game, so she started downloading it to her computer. As soon as the girl saw how good the version was and how complete it was, she immediately became happy because, with this update, she could regain her first place in the ranking. For this reason, the girl, of course, became interested. She quickly installed and began to open the folder in which this game was downloaded. She believed that she should be the first to complete the full version of this game. And the next minute, as soon as she clicked on this folder, she suddenly lost consciousness. And when she opened her eyes the next time, she noticed that she was in a completely unfamiliar place. The girl did not understand what had happened at all. However, as soon as she looked around and saw a rather familiar interior around her, she realized that somehow she had been transported into the game. Of course, this scared her very much. She didn't understand how she got there at all. And besides, she was reincarnated as a baby. In fact, despite the fact that the girl entered the game in this way, no exit window or parameters appeared for her, and this made her a little worried. The girl also noticed that the script and detailed developments differed from the basic version. Now everything was completely different there. For example, the main character who meant Flax was a saint, and now was the daughter of a duke, and when the girl thought about it, she did not understand how she had to create 3 main male characters until she grew up. She thought that she would probably have to go all the way to the end in order to return to her real world. At that moment, the girl understood that she simply had no choice. So she decided to come to terms with the situation. Her mother was holding her in her arms and looking out the window. She told her daughter that there was an incredibly beautiful sunset, and it was as beautiful as her beloved daughter. Thus, the girl found out what her name was now because her mother told Natalie that she loved her incredibly much. Now that Natalie was all grown up and that unfamiliar voice reminded her of the whole story, she remembered everything down to the smallest detail. What scared the girl most was the fact that she didn't even notice how she began to forget all this information. Natalie thought she knew it was a game when she was really little, but over time, when she grew up a little, for some reason, she began to perceive all situations as reality. Then Natalie thought about when this could have happened and realized that it happened at the moment when Sharon came to the estate. When the girl was just reborn, she thought that she would have time to capture the goals as soon as she became an adult. She thought that she could easily get through the ending, have fun, and finally get out of this game. However, everything did not happen as she expected. The girl assumed that so much time spent with Sharon forced her mind to assimilate as well, And for this reason, she forgot that it was all unreal. She was truly amazed that she was somehow able to forget about all of this. And she also realized that she had been chasing her father and brother only so that they would love her, and this became her main goal. She was incredibly jealous of Sharon, who was adored and truly appreciated by everyone around her, unlike Natalie, and because of this, her entire mind simply became clouded. How did the girl start living not as herself, but as a game character, namely Natalie? Her mind was no longer under control, and in the end there was an attempt to make a tragic choice for herself. She understood that if this voice had not addressed her, then everything would have ended very sadly. But she also realized that if she had jumped from the balcony, she could have been stuck in this game forever, and was very happy that this did not happen. She remembered that she once received a notification that said that exiting the game was impossible until the goal was achieved. And if she tried to forcefully exit, the exit could be permanently disabled. Thus, Natalie understood that this meant that if she died before reaching the final, she would have to start all over again. And it was not a fact that she would be able to eventually complete the game and exit this game world. Meanwhile, the girl went back into the room. She took off her shoes and thought that she was very glad that her memories had returned to her. At such a moment, if only a little more, she might have had to go through all those terrible events again. Besides, Natalie, there was no guarantee that she would not forget all this again. As soon as the girl went back into the room, the first thing she did was step on the black wig that her brother had thrown off her. Natalie looked at him for a while, but then she suddenly smiled and thought that she was really unhappy, and she felt very sorry that she had wasted so much time. The girl thought that she would really like for people to think not of a black crow or a poisonous mushroom when they remembered her, but of the shining sun as if at the dawn of a new day. And for this reason, the girl was ready to change absolutely her entire life. So she was very happy that all her memories returned to her, and now she could change her destiny. From that moment, several hours passed. The girl did not even notice how the night ended and dawn began. The girl looked at it and thought that it really reminded her of her soul and appearance, just like her mother said in childhood. For a while, she admired the beautiful sunrise, and when the sun rose a little higher, Natalie returned to the room and thought that it was time for her to plan her escape. The girl wrote down important information on paper, for example, that in this game, there were 3 main male characters. The first was the Crown Prince. He is the most handsome man in the Empire. The second was the cold-blooded Northern Duke, who treated with warmth only his woman, whom he truly loved very much. There was also a psychopathic tower owner who suppressed magical power. This person could be really dangerous, so the girl wrote down that she had to treat him with special care. Natalie also recalled that as soon as their level of attachment to the heroine exceeded 70%, their ownership became more intense. Natalia knew that the matter could turn out to be quite cruel towards all of them, so she decided not to discard the option that they could all live together happily. Natalie was also very happy because the time when all 3 would gather in one place was just around the corner, and this meant that she was quite lucky because she just had to be patient a little more, just like Madame Duperre's hat or the money she won at the races. And besides that terrible party in Rayfield, the girl thought that it was all just a coincidence. However, now that Natalie knew the truth, she realized that all this happened because she subconsciously remembered the right choices and could not simply do otherwise. Even though this version of the game was not absolutely identical to the main version, the structure was still similar, so as soon as she heard similar events, her brain itself was able to remember the correct answers. Then Natalie suddenly thought that this also meant that in the basic version, when the holy heroine visited the nobleman's estate, fire-type monsters appeared to burn the estate and caused a lot of casualties. The girl was aware of the fact that if all her previous premonitions came true, then this also meant that there was a high probability that a monster would appear soon and attack this place. Of course, Natalie was not at all happy about this. However, Ruffle understood that first she had to protect Elestin. Then she stood up from her seat and went to the window and looked into the distance. She thought that being the daughter of the Duke of Elsna was a position that would easily and perfectly allow her to meet the 3 main characters. For this reason, she could not afford to just take and lose this wonderful chance. So Natalie was very serious. The girl knew that if she wanted to prevent the Duke's estate from turning into a sea of flames, she would have to meet this monster first. She knew that the man blessed by the god of water and possessing the most powerful water powers in history was Roger Crawford. This tall, dark-haired man had quite an attractive appearance, and the divine love of the water god was a real blessing for him. Finally, despite all these successes, this thing was also a curse for him. The man was not as ideally happy as everyone thought. He had many of his own problems because of this blessing. Natalie was happy that everything turned out this way because they both needed mutual help, and the girl, like the man, could provide it to each other. Therefore, the first thing she did was go to his estate. As soon as she drove up to a very gloomy mansion, she immediately thought that this was probably the very same Crawford estate. Getting out of his carriage, the girl's escort told her to get out carefully, and also said that they had already arrived at the place she asked for. As soon as Natalie got out of the carriage, she immediately asked why no one came out to greet them, because she assumed that someone definitely saw the carriage. The man who accompanied her was a little surprised as well, but he explained that visitors were quite rare in this area, so only a minimal number of staff were present. Natalie, hearing that there were practically no visitors in the estate, thought that in her memories of the game, Crawford's mansion was always filled with various people. The man, as soon as he saw that she was thinking about something, immediately turned to her and said that in fact they didn't even have security unless it was nighttime. Natalie, meanwhile, replied that she understood everything, but she herself thought about the fact that it all looked as if the full edition of this game had some other settings, and this caused her some inconvenience. But soon she came to the gates and opening them said that for the ducal family, this place was kept in very poor condition. Walking past the garden, she also thought about the fact that the size and structure of the mansion were not at all what she remembered, so it was interesting for her to explore the new area. She thought about how irresponsible it was to neglect this place to such an extent and decided that something serious must have happened since it had been neglected so much. At that moment, a crow that was sitting on one of the trees that the girl was passing by got a little furious and immediately flew to Natalie. She began to cling to her with her claws, and the girl tried to throw it away from her head. But at that moment, she suddenly saw that someone appeared next to her, and the raven left, and the girl immediately realized that this person was in the form of a bird. Natalie immediately became interested in who he was. However, at that moment, she heard a male voice that addressed her directly, saying that there were not supposed to be any planned guests, so he wanted to know what she was doing on the territory of his mansion. In front of her stood in all his beauty that very beloved Roger Blood of the god of water, and the girl really thought that he had a good appearance. The man came closer to her and said that he asked who she was and would really like to hear her answer. Natalie bowed slightly and said that she was very glad to meet dear Roger Crawford. After that, she made a curtsy, as was proper. The girl stated her name and said that she was the eldest daughter of his bride, Alciden. She looked at him and said that she wanted to meet him even if it meant disturbing his peace and showing up unannounced. The man, hearing her, immediately put on his clothes because he was completely naked. Then he asked what brought the daughter of the Alciden family to him. The girl smiled and said that in fact he was the man who was surprised by this. But Natalie replied that she had to deal with him, and that was the reason she came. The man did not chase her away. He led her into the estate. They made hot tea for her. The girl sat opposite him, and there was a small, awkward silence between them. In fact, there weren't even any treats. There was just black tea and not the most expensive brand. Of course, Natalie had no right to complain, but for the tea of the ducal family, it was very modest. Of course, she was not treated badly as a guest. Next to her was a young maid who paid the most attention to her, and the girl liked it because this was the kind of treatment she was used to. But soon Natalie realized that despite the fact that the maid was dressed in women's clothing, it was a man. She also noticed rather strange glances in her direction, and the fact that he was silent for so long and did not say anything. Then Natalie thought about the fact that Roger was certainly bankrupt, and for this reason he simply decided to shelter this servant because he could easily play on pity. Their silence was finally broken by the man, who said that as soon as the snacks were ready, the servant could leave. His assistant, smiling happily, said that of course. After that, he put the necessary dishes on the table and said that the man could call him at any time if he needed anything, he would be nearby. Roger, meanwhile, continued to drink tea, and turning to the girl, he said that he was very ashamed that the snacks were so modest. However, he could not allow himself more. The girl herself felt a little uncomfortable about this. However, she said that, in fact, he didn't have to worry about it because she arrived very suddenly, so it was quite obvious that he wasn't ready to greet guests as expected. She also said that he was not at all obliged to believe her, because what was important to him was the untruth of her words, but the price that she wanted to offer for them. Roger, hearing this, immediately smiled. He was interested in these words, and he asked what price such a young lady like her could offer him. The girl, meanwhile, smiling, replied that on the imperial floor in a week she was going to be his partner, and Roger, hearing this, was in a stupor. But the man immediately said that it was a waste of time, so she was not obliged to do it at all. After all, he probably didn't intend to go there himself. Natalie, of course, assumed that it would not be so easy to persuade him, but the man sighed heavily and said that he did not understand how this could be beneficial to him, but he could still come to this ball alone and would not see any problems in it. But the girl stood up from her seat and said that this could definitely be useful to His Highness. He just hadn't yet fully realized the benefits. Natalie approached him and asked if it was true that he had problems controlling his abilities at that time. Roger immediately became wary upon hearing this. He clenched his hand into a fist and asked what she meant and why she decided to talk about this topic at all. But Natalie replied that if His Highness would completely protect her and her family from monsters, then she would be able to stabilize the condition and his powers. After that, she turned to him and asked if she could take his hand for a minute in order to demonstrate how capable she was. The girl immediately explained that it would be much faster for her to simply directly show how effective it would be. Roger was wary for a while, but he still extended his hand to the girl, and at that moment they held hands, looking each other straight in the eyes. It was a rather awkward and somewhat intimate moment. Roger immediately said that nothing happened, so he did not understand what exactly the girl was going to prove to him, but at that moment he suddenly felt something in his hand. In fact, the crazy beating water that was inside him gradually began to calm down. He did not understand how the girl could do something like that. This made him very wary. However, Roger understood that the effect was really visible. Natalie, meanwhile, said that he needed to attend the ball. However, it would be very difficult for him to control his abilities if he went alone. She also added, smiling happily, that the captain of his guards could not simply be absent, and if Natalie was next to him as his partner, then he would finally be able to stabilize his emotions and strength, just as happened at that moment. The girl tried to prove to him that in this way she would be really very useful to him. The man, who was really able to control his emotions, said that it was very good, and he was ready to accept the young lady's offer. Hearing this, Natalie was sincerely happy. She said that she was very grateful to him for this, and that she would never let him down. However, Roger also said that if the monsters do not appear tomorrow night, he will assume that the girl approached him with other intentions, and then he will question their entire agreement. But Natalie wasn't afraid at all about this. She said that tomorrow evening she would wait for his visit so that he would fulfill his part of the agreement. She was absolutely sure that the monsters would appear. Roger looked quite stern. However, he said that he would wait for this evening because he really didn't believe the girl's words and wanted to check everything himself. After she finished her tea, Natalie left the room. She was very pleased with the result because she could consider this meeting the first successful. She was able to lay the foundation for their further relationship. And besides, in this way she was able to win 2 successful cases for herself. It was only believed that he would be happy to be his shield, and she, in turn, was supposed to be his weapon. Several hours passed from that moment, and now evening had come. The butler entered Roger's office and said that the girl had already returned to her palace. After that, he asked if his master really believed everything she told him. Roger looked at the beautiful moon that lit up the sky for a while and said that her eyes did not look as if she was lying. Of course, he assumed that perhaps she would want to atone for that day. Even if it was a small possibility, it was pleasant for this man to think that it could be true. Therefore, Roger turned to his butler and told him to get ready for tomorrow night, because if the girl had not lied, then she should have been stormy. At the same time, Natalie was already really in the palace. She knew that her father and brother had not yet returned from the capital, so she was going to sneak into her room before anyone noticed it. The girl didn't want to attract attention to herself once again. However, as soon as she was about to open the door, she heard Sharon's voice behind her. Sharon looked very worried and turned to her sister and asked where she was going in the middle of the night. Natalie looked away from her and said that she just went outside a little to spend some time in the fresh air. Nothing special. When Natalie was about to enter the room, Sharon suddenly grabbed her hand and started shouting loudly at her. She said that she thought something was wrong when the girl was not in her room, so she asked if Natalie really went out completely alone and also asked if the girl even understood how dangerous it was to walk alone at such a late hour. At that moment, Natalie also heard the maids start whispering among themselves because they heard her sister scream perfectly. One of the maids said that the young duke had definitely ordered her not to leave her room until he returned, so they became very worried as soon as they heard that she had actually gone anywhere. The girls thought that the family had already had to endure enough because of Natalie, and now she decided that she could leave without permission and thereby break all the rules. The girls decided that now it was not at all surprising that they called the girl a troublemaker and peacemaker in their house. And besides, it was quite obvious why no one loved her. Natalie didn't like that Sharon made such a scream, and therefore, removing her sister's hands from hers, she asked why the girl had entered her room at all. Her sister made a worried expression and said that she noticed that the girl looked very upset, and she was worried, so she wanted to tell her one very important thing. Sharon handed her a small jar and said that this was hair dye. She had always said that she wanted black hair, and with the help of this thing, she would definitely be able to get it for herself. I also continued to smile. She said that since her wig was damaged, she thought that it would be easiest to just dye her hair this way, and it would even last a long time. Natalie smiled and thanked Sharon for such kindness. However, she told her to keep the paint with her. She had no need for it now. Sharon immediately ran up to her little sister. She took her hands and with a trembling voice, because she wanted to cry, asked if she had really done something wrong, and she also asked her for forgiveness if she had really offended her in some way. Natalie patted her sister on the head and said that she hadn't really done anything wrong, so she didn't have to worry about it. She explained that she simply didn't need black hair anymore. Of course, her hair color was very beautiful. However, Natalie replied that her hair was also no worse, so she wasn't going to change it. After that, she simply went into her room and kicked the door right in front of Sharon. The girl remained standing in the hallway, completely not understanding what had happened and what to do next. Meanwhile, the maid ran up to her mistress and asked if everything was okay with her, because she noticed that the paint from her bottle had spilled absolutely everywhere. Now her hands were black. She also asked that Lady Sharon not even dare to tell her that Natalie did this specifically in order to somehow take revenge on her, or, on the contrary, just to harm her for her own pleasure. Sharon, meanwhile, continued to cry. She suddenly said that everything was fine with her. If this was necessary for Natalia to feel better, then she was ready to do this. She also thanked all the maids for being so worried about her. Meanwhile, the other maids who were eavesdropping on the conversation began to banter with each other about the dog, and they noticed that Natalie's mood had changed a lot. And in general, the way she behaved was now different. Her other maid agreed. She said that the girl didn't even wear a wig anymore, and this was completely unlike her, so they suspected something was wrong. At the same time, when the brother returned home, he called the girl to him and began to scold her because news reached him that she had gone outside, despite the fact that he had forbidden her to do so. Anatoly yelled at her and asked what right she had to do this. Natalie was not going to tolerate all this, so she thought that she needed to end this conversation as soon as possible. The girl stood up from her seat and turned to her brother and said that she was just going to apologize because of this, and really said that she was asking for forgiveness and that she was sorry that she acted like that. As soon as Anatoly heard this, he was very surprised. He did not understand why she just went and apologized. She swore that she would rather be punished than ever apologize to him, so he decided that there was something wrong. But the girl began to come closer to him and said that she knew that he and her father had been cleaning up after her all this time. However, from that moment on, she was ready to swear that she would know her place and live accordingly. Natalie replied that she would be quiet, obedient, and submissive, so that they would no longer have to be ashamed because of her. The man, having heard all this, could not believe that she actually said these words herself and immediately asked what she had in mind. Natalie suddenly wondered if her apologies had sounded insincere, since he was so surprised and started asking her about it. She turned away from him and began to walk away. She said that if he was satisfied, he could inflict some kind of punishment on her. She came up and picked up an iron thing that could be quite powerful. She handed the stick to the man and asked if it was enough for him to satisfy his desire to punish her for her disobedience. As soon as Anatoly heard this, he was very alarmed, and even sweat appeared on his face. He asked his sister if she really wanted him to hit her with this thing. Natalie smiled and asked if it really wasn't enough for him. She said that this was usually the thing he used for beatings, so she assumed that he would want to do it. And one more time. In reality, she just wanted him to hit her a few times and get it over with. She was very irritated by the fact that he was dragging this whole conversation out. She wanted to leave for the room as soon as possible. The man, meanwhile, continued to talk to her about something. But at that very moment, Sharon was standing at their door. She heard that there were two of them there, and for some time the girl did not dare to go inside. She heard part of the conversation and then decided to demonstratively save Natalie. The girl quickly opened the doors as soon as she heard something. Oppa fights and ran inside. She grabbed her brother by the hand and screamed for him not to do this. The girl burst into tears in order to evoke pity and asked her brother not to be angry with Natalie. She would be upset again, so she asked him to just let her go, and that's it. Anatoly was very angry at that moment. His feelings and thoughts were in a hurry. He didn't know what to do, so he turned to Natalie and said that in that case they would talk again. But later at that moment, he had no desire to talk to her about anything. He glanced at the girl and said that she would have to give the correct answer to this punishment, after which he allowed Natalie to leave. The girl herself thought about the fact that in fact she gave him this stick into his hands for punishment only in order to leave his room as quickly as possible because she felt uncomfortable being there. However, his reaction was quite strange to her. She didn't know what caused it. However, she assumed that perhaps he was a little alarmed because the girl didn't throw a tantrum as she usually did. She didn't think about it for long because at that moment he was not important to her at all. Their estate was supposed to burn down at midnight. Therefore, Natalie had many other worries that she had to cope with. She returned to her room and put on more comfortable shoes for herself. The girl thought that it would be best not to wear heels that day because she might have to run and it would be very uncomfortable with them. Natalie smiled at the fact that she had a comfortable pair of shoes. After all, they were heels. She definitely wouldn't be able to run away from the burning estate, although she still hoped that it wouldn't come to that. Then she sat down opposite the window and thought that nothing would go as planned, and all because she was not going to allow this to happen. Several hours passed from that moment, and it was already completely dark outside. There was still a little time left until midnight, and Natalie went out onto the balcony to refresh her thoughts. Everything was absolutely normal and ordinary except for the eerie silence that was around the estate. The air was very heavy, and Natalie understood that this was definitely supposed to happen. She realized the fact that very soon what was in her visions would begin, and because of this, she was even more wary. And so, exactly at midnight, their estate was indeed attacked by the most terrible monsters. A strong explosion occurred, and the fire spread throughout all the rooms. Natalie, because she was standing on the balcony, could hear the maids running out of the estate and shouting about Tom and the fire. The girls also saw various monsters. They tried to escape from them. However, not everyone succeeded, and some began to die halfway to salvation. Natalie thought about how the estate was now in complete disarray. Roger had to arrive as soon as possible before someone else died. She hoped that he wouldn't be late, and that he believed her after all. She also thought that she also had to start leaving this place. After all, if something went wrong, she certainly didn't want to die. But at the moment when she was about to run into the room, Natalie suddenly saw how the flying fire monster noticed her and began to approach straight towards the girl. Of course, she could not foresee or expect this. Because of this, the girl was quite frightened. She did not know what to do and how to resist this monster. Natalie didn't understand at all what was happening because the monster shouldn't have appeared at this stage of the game, which is why she was really worried. In fact, after taking a closer look at it, she noticed that it was a monster with the attributes of a top-level fire that should only be discovered next year. Because of this, Natalie was very worried. She did not understand. Did they really increase the difficulty in the full version of the game? And for this reason, this monster appeared much earlier than it was supposed to. The girl also suggested that perhaps it was some kind of glitch in the game. In any case, whatever it was, she needed to somehow buy time, at least until Roger finally arrived to help her. Some time has passed since then. Anatoly and his father have already returned from their trip, and the first thing they discovered around them was that their house was completely engulfed in flames. The boy turned to his father and said that he believed that it was a high-level monster with fire attributes. So he said that their light aura, that is the nature, was much weaker when confronted with fire. And if she is of the highest level, then they will definitely not be able to deal with this monster at all. His father said that he knows all this very well, and that is why their priority should be saving the people inside and not defeating the monster. At that very moment, one of the butlers who had managed to escape suddenly ran up to them. He turned to the Duke and said that the young ladies were hidden inside the room, and it was impossible to get to them and save them. As soon as the father heard this, he was very surprised and asked in an angry voice, "Have they really not left the estate yet?" But at that moment, Anatoly shouted, turning to his father and pointing to Natalie's room. He told him to look there. And as soon as the man did this, he saw that the girl was standing on the veranda, and one of these bloodthirsty monsters was rushing straight at her. It was clear that he wanted to kill her. At the same time, the girl covered herself from the fire as best she could. She understood that everything was bad. Dying in this place was definitely not part of her plan. So Natalie thought about what she should do. Meanwhile, she suddenly heard Sharon scream, who also went out onto her balcony, which was opposite her sister, and she turned to Natalie and said that she was very scared. The girl also said that she wanted her sister to save her, but Natalie was very surprised when she saw Sharon. She did not understand why she was still in the estate, but she said that she should come to her in that case. When Anatoly looked more closely, he saw that Sharon was also there, and because of this, he became even more scared and started yelling at his father, telling him that he had to do something about all this. The man did not hesitate. He understood that he could not lose his daughters, so he rode his horse straight towards the estate. Natalie, meanwhile, noticed that her father and brother were going to save Sharon. She understood that she was left for herself, so she was not even surprised by the fact that no one would save her. Then the sister turned to Sharon, who was standing next to her, and told her to remain calm because when her father and brother approached, she needed to jump down and save herself that way. She also said that they would definitely catch her down below, so Sharon had to do it as soon as she saw them. But the girl, hearing this, immediately began to cry. She asked how she could even jump from this place. She was very scared. The girl said that she definitely couldn't do it, but Natalie tried to calm her down and said that she could definitely do it. And she also added that Sharon definitely didn't want to die just by burning alive in that place, so she had to save herself. And at that moment, she suddenly saw that Anatoly had galloped up quite close. Natalie gathered her courage and pushed her sister straight off the veranda for her own good. For some time, Sharon flew down. She screamed loudly. However, soon she landed right in her brother's arms, and because of this, she was already calm. At some point, she was really sure that she would die. Anatoly, meanwhile, turned to his father and said that he already had Sharon, so he asked him to go to bed. Meanwhile, the fire began to spread even more. The girl thought that this monster was so persistent that he could not leave her alone. Of course, this really irritated Natalie. At that moment, she had already begun to gradually lose consciousness and did not have time to notice that this monster that had been attacking her all this time had already activated its abilities and was about to strike. The first to notice this was Anatoly, who was below. He shouted loudly, addressing his sister and father, who was already nearby, and told them to be careful. But at that moment, Natalie suddenly saw that in addition to the red fire, some other blue smoke began to appear. She immediately understood who it belonged to because it was the power of Roger's water. The girl was very happy that he finally came. She saw that now she could go down a little, and with the help of Roger's abilities, she jumped straight into his arms. As soon as Roger caught her, he smiled, looked the girl straight in the eyes, and said that he came to fulfill his promise, and also asked for forgiveness for doubting the truthfulness of her words. Natalie said that everything was fine. As soon as they moved away from the estate that was engulfed in flames, he put her on the ground, and the girl thanked him for coming and also said that his act was impeccable. She thought about the fact that in order to use his magic power just once and kill all the high-class monsters, he needed to have a lot of strength, so she was not surprised that the water deity loved him. Roger himself got off his horse, looked the girl straight in the eyes, and said that he would be grateful if she didn't look at him so intently, because it made him feel a little awkward. Natalie, hearing this, immediately asked if he was really embarrassed. Well, the man replied that it was because someone was looking at him as if it was the person who was going to kill him, and he did not want to feel such feelings again. At that moment, their rather sweet heart-to-heart conversation was interrupted by Natalie's father. He looked very stern and approached them, but did not say anything for a while. In fact, Natalie knew that usually her father was too focused on Sharon to notice her in the same way her brother did. When she looked at the expressions on their faces, she realized that they thought that this whole incident was again her fault. So Natalie wouldn't even be surprised if one of them made a scene right in front of Roger. The girl sighed heavily and thought about the fact that an explanation would be very difficult for them. She simply hoped that everything would end with a short cry and there would be no detailed questions about anything. And then suddenly, after a short silence, her father suddenly spoke. He said that before he officially expressed his gratitude for helping Roger, he would like him to return his daughter to him. As soon as Natalie heard this, she was a little surprised. She thought about the fact that all this time he even looked at Roger, but not at her, and because of this, she did not know what she needed to do in the end. At that very moment, the man pushed Natalie so that she would go forward to her father and brother. But the girl did not understand why he did this, because she was not going to approach them. Then Anatoly spoke up. He turned to the Duke and said that touching the body of a lady from another noble house was against etiquette, so he would recommend that he never do that again. After this, her father, stretching out his hand forward, turned to the girl and said that she should immediately go with him. His gaze was very stern, and she understood that serious punishment awaited her. Well, Natalie didn't leave and listen to them. She suddenly took Roger's hand and looked into his eyes with a joyful smile. She thanked him with all her heart for saving her. Continuing to smile, she said that His Excellency must have been stunned too after that. She asked if he would like to go with her to the living room. The man was silent for a while. However, he then said that he assumed that he needed to explain this to both the head and the heir of the house. After all, they probably had quite a few questions about how exactly the man appeared in their house. For this reason, Roger did not refuse, and soon they entered the undamaged part of the estate and all sat down in the living room over a cup of tea. Natalie's father thanked the man for providing timely assistance and said that if it were not for him, his daughter would no longer be with them. Roger looked completely serious. He said that he simply did what was necessary. The girl herself thought about the fact that this conversation was so dry that it could practically fall apart at any moment. Then after a short silence, the Duke turned to Roger and asked how the man had learned of such a terrible grief in the dead of night and how he had managed to arrive so promptly. Roger, looking away from him, immediately said that in fact he was walking at dawn and accidentally saw how monsters had gathered in this place. Hearing this, the Duke of course did not believe him, but Natalie decided to intervene in their conversation and said that whatever the reason, one cannot dispute the fact that Roger helped their family and home. After that, she asked how they were supposed to repay him for such an act. The man replied that he thought the reward would be too big. However, he certainly would not refuse it. And then Roger said that as they all probably already knew, the imperial ball was about to take place and he was obliged to attend, but unfortunately he did not have a suitable partner. So looking at Natalie, he said that he would like to officially propose to the lady to be his partner at that wonderful event. Only Anatoly heard this and of course did not believe his words. He smiled and said that it seemed to him that this was too little to repay Roger for such invaluable help. But Natalie smiled and said that she actually wasn't against it. She agreed to be his partner for this ball and would happily go there. But her brother continued to insist on his own and said that the man should give them the opportunity to show their sincerity in another way. They would like to offer him something more profitable and bigger. Roger interrupted him and said that he had asked the young lady to be his partner, and she had agreed. So he explained that the guy didn't have to worry about anything else. He was quite happy with the deal. Of course, Anatoly was very surprised. However, he stood up from his seat and was about to say something to his father, but he interrupted him. He looked at his son with an icy gaze and told him to mind his manners in front of their dear guest. Anatoly immediately realized that it would be best to just shut up, so that's what he did. The man lowered his head and said nothing more. Then Roger decided to break their awkward silence because he was really feeling uncomfortable about it. He, rising from his seat, said that her presence as his partner would be more than enough as a token of gratitude. So he explained to their entire family that he definitely did not need any other gestures, and for this reason, they could not worry. After that, he asked them for forgiveness, but said that it was time for him to leave because he still had several things to do. Natalie smiled and asked him to stay for one more minute and said that it was almost morning already, so she asked if he would like to stay with them for breakfast. She stood up and, coming closer to him, turned to her father with a smile on her face and asked if she could take her benefactor to the banquet hall, because she thought that it would be quite normal. Anatoly immediately began to shout at his sister. He already wanted to protest and say something to her, but his father again shut him up. He told the guests that they were very sorry for their son's behavior, And he also said that perhaps because of this, Roger thought that they were not such a worthy family as they were said to be. However, he tried to assure him that this was not the case. The man asked for forgiveness in an icy voice and said that the young Duke and he had urgent business to attend to, so they had to leave and unfortunately would not be able to join them for breakfast. Roger was also not very friendly towards the Duke. He told the man that he could do as he pleased. After that, the two of them left, and before the door closed, Natalie heard her father turn to Anatoly and tell him to go with him to his office. The guy understood perfectly well that he had said a lot of unnecessary things, and now a very unpleasant and long conversation awaited him. Because of this, he was already upset. After they came into the office, the man immediately bowed. He turned to his father and said that he had disgraced the honor of their family in front of the outsider, so he said that there was definitely no apology for him. The father didn't even look at him. He stood with his back to his son and said that his personal allowance would be cut in half over the next few months. So he advised the guy to carefully evaluate his actions and do much better in the future. Despite the fact that Anatoly was incredibly irritated by all this, because he considered himself right, he still told his father that he understood everything and of course he would try to do better. However, he then said that he would also like to talk to him about Natalie. Something continued to bother him, and he could not simply remain silent about it. The guy asked if they really shouldn't have prevented Natalie from getting closer to the Duke of Crawford. He thought that it would have been too wrong and to some extent even dangerous for them. Anatoly explained that if they simply left everything as it was, she would definitely break the ban, and then everything would be completely different from what they had imagined. The guy said that it was all like a perfectly written script, a situation that would make her fall at first sight, and her entire rescue made him very suspicious. Explain to your father that the girl since childhood desperately needed the attention of her father and brother. However, as soon as Duke Crawford appeared, the man himself saw how she did not even look at them, even once. Anatoly explained that all of this was very strange. And besides, it was an awkward request for her to become his dance partner. All of this was too suspicious. How could the man say that if Natalie ultimately foolishly falls in love with the Duke, it would create problems for them and could perhaps even attract his attention to their person? Anatoly explained to father that they definitely couldn't allow something like that to happen. But at that moment, the man asked about Sharon. Anatoly explained that all the servants calmed her down and took her back to bed. The family doctor said that there was no reason to worry, so everything should be fine with her. Hearing about this, the man smiled and said that she was weak, so it was necessary to check her more often and make sure that she was completely healthy. Anatoly did not object because he was going to do it anyway. However, without even turning to his son, he also said that he knew everything about that ban very well, so he did not understand why his son Tak began to worry as if his father was completely unaware of all this. He walked up to his desk and, taking the photograph in his hands, said that Natalie had always been a very difficult and capricious child, so this was to be expected. He also said that her interest was bound to fade away soon, so he didn't think they needed to worry so much about everything here. However, the father still did not object and agreed with Anatoly that Roger was indeed quite suspicious. Just like the girl, her attitude had completely changed, and this made him a little worried. Anatoly looked away from his father and said that he would take full responsibility for keeping this man away from her, and in this way, he hoped to atone for his guilt. The man did not object to this either. He advised Anatoly to be careful so that he did not dare to become attached to Natalie without the need for it. Anatoly was, of course, a little surprised by such a request. However, he still understood how responsible it was, so he agreed with his father and said that he would do everything. At the same time, the sun had already begun to rise outside. Natalie brought the man into the room and asked for forgiveness for the fact that he had to wait a little while until she returned to him again. Natalie explained that she simply needed to change, and now she was wearing a beautiful fitted blue dress that looked perfect on her. After this, the girl immediately returned to the conversation and said that she was grateful that he had finally done what she asked him to do. Smiling, he replied that this was part of their deal, and now it was the young lady's turn. She now had to help him. The girl smiled happily and said that of course she remembered all of this, after which she took his hand and began to calm his magical abilities. The man immediately felt better at that moment. Sometime after it was all over, the girl said that now she would like to have breakfast, after which she added that he still had to fulfill the rest of his promise. Roger suddenly became wary. He turned to the young lady and said that he really could not understand what she was thinking at all, so he asked her to say directly what she wanted. Natalie smiled and said that it was all quite obvious that she wanted to feed him well. The girl said that she had prepared a steak with sauce for him and asked him to also try the salmon that had been fried in butter with lemon and dill. The girl explained that this was her favorite way of cooking salmon, and she also asked if it was true that he could not refuse sweets either, because she had prepared him a peach pie with mascarpone cream. Meanwhile, Roger sat down opposite her, taking his place at the plate, and told young Linda that apparently at her house only guests participate in the banquet, since she still hadn't touched the food. Natalie looked at him in surprise. She didn't understand what exactly he meant, but the girl said that she had said that she hadn't eaten all day, so he said that she also needed to have breakfast. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately smiled and asked if this really meant that he was worried about her now, because that's exactly how it seemed to her. The girl herself thought about the fact that the level of his affection should have definitely increased by now, so she decided to check just in case. She said a special phrase with the help of which a special menu should appear, thanks to which she would find out the necessary information. However, after Natalie said this phrase, nothing happened, and the man also heard her and looked at the girl in surprise, not understanding what she wanted to say. The girl thought it was very strange when she said the key word. Then the level of affection should have appeared immediately, so she did not understand why this did not happen. The man then turned to her after a short silence and asked if he should answer this question. The girl suggested that perhaps this was another mistake, or the problem was in the complexity she did not understand. But in answer to the man's question, she told him not to worry about it. There was nothing wrong with it, so he could just continue eating breakfast. Natalie, meanwhile, was a little worried. She thought that even on high difficulty, the dating simulator game should not block the affection check, so it remained a mystery to her what had happened after all. She thought about how she was supposed to fix it and didn't even know if she could do anything about this error. Roger, meanwhile, turned to her again and said that as the young lady had already said, the beast had indeed appeared in the center of the capital. Even Duke Elston had no idea at all how she had been able to foresee this incident. Smiling, Natalie replied that in fact the truth was that she had prophetic dreams. She remembered that she had to explain all this to Roger in order to have cooperation with him, and perhaps assumed that then she would have an affection scale. She started eating dessert and said that in fact, this is how she recently received the nickname Lady Luck, precisely because of such prophetic dreams. The man hearing this was surprised and asked if it was really true that, according to her words, she saw in her dreams both her condition and the attack of this very monster. For him, this sounded like something fantastic. Smiling at the girl, Kakaya also said that she saw in her dreams and the fact that he was soon supposed to go to that very ball. Roger sighed heavily and said that apparently she really hadn't deceived him, and these prophetic dreams weren't just nonsense, so he agreed and was still going to believe her for a while. That's right. The man still said that he didn't understand what his extended vacation had to do with her. He assumed that their deal was supposed to end after the ball and asked did he really misunderstand something? Natalie smiled and said that they would definitely see each other again, even after the ball. Then she decided to come closer to him in order to definitely notify him about this. The girl gently ran her hand over his cheek and said that, for example, in order to destroy the monster together, like this time, she even dared and sat right on his lap. Thereby, she surprised Roger very much and interested him in her person even more. The man still continued to insist on his own. He said that for him it was all really strange, and the girl was somehow very unusual, so he still could not understand what she wanted to achieve with all this. However, Natalie replied that she often hears that she is called strange, so she was not at all offended by this, after which they continued their breakfast in silence. When it was all over, Roger came in a secret to pick up his horse and go back. But in reality, he received sumptuous dishes for breakfast that he would not have even touched if he had not received an order from the emperor himself. In fact, he didn't even notice how he was able to eat all that food at the end. Natalie said that she didn't eat anything yesterday, so she was hungry. Roger assumed that he had already reached the stage where he could give in to such manipulations. He considered it a useless, constant misfortune, so he did not even consider the girl in any romantic sense. He had forbidden himself to do this a long time ago. At that moment, he was about to free his horse when he suddenly heard steps behind him. The guy immediately became alert. Turning around, he saw that a young lady had approached him. And this lady was Sharon. She saw Roger and immediately asked for forgiveness for interrupting him. Then she decided to come closer to him, saying that she had to do something. Eventually, the girl plucked up a lot of courage. She came closer to him and fell straight into his arms. The girl pretended that she did it by accident, but in fact it was not so. After Roger pushed her away from him in surprise, Sharon moved closer to him and asked for forgiveness. She said that she had simply accidentally tripped over a rock and did not want to cause him such inconvenience. At the same time, she even held his hand. The girl smiled and said that she would like to introduce herself because she realized that he did not yet know who she was. Then the girl said her name and made a curtsy in order to greet him properly. Roger, meanwhile, showed no interest in this person. Then the girl also said that she heard that the man had helped them a lot and asked how she could thank him for such kindness and generosity. But Roger immediately put his hand on her shoulder and said that this was not something she needed to worry about at all. They had already decided everything in advance, so she didn't even need to think about it. After that, he said that the young lady promised to thank him for this help. For this reason, everything was under control. Sharon immediately thought that they were talking about her, and embarrassed, she straightened her hair, and the girl said that her father had not told her anything about this yet, and therefore she did not know anything. She said that she planned to answer His Highness sincerely, and for this reason she admitted that she really knew nothing about any deal of theirs. However, Roger replied that Lady Natalie was exactly the one he was talking about, and certainly not Sharon. As soon as Sharon heard these words, she immediately felt very uncomfortable. She couldn't even imagine that they were talking about her sister. She even said that this couldn't be. But Roger didn't even intend to tell her anything else. He turned away from her and said that it was time for him to leave, and he didn't want to linger. But Sharon tried to stop him. She turned to the man and said that there must have been some mistake. The man did not understand why she was so attached to him. This was already starting to irritate him a lot. So he told the girl that if the rumor spread that she had been following a man outside all the way to the stables, it could put you in an awkward position, so he would advise her to move away already. The girl was genuinely confused. She didn't know what to do and how to act correctly, and she also didn't understand why the man behaved in this way. However, Roger, taking the horse out of the stable and sitting on it, said that he believed that he should leave first and she should wait for some time, and only after that could she also leave the stable. He didn't even look at her at the end. The man, just looking straight ahead, began to drive Sharon, at the same time was very upset, offended, and humiliated. At that moment, she thought that everything happened just as she had expected. The man did not remember her at all, and because of this, she was incredibly angry. Sharon assumed that it was too early to remind of her existence. For this reason, she decided to wait a little longer. At that moment, she took out a small gold chain that was very important to her as a memory. She decided that she would just continue to hope that everyone would recognize her very soon. For this reason, she finally calmed down. After Roger returned to his estate, he decided to test his strength, which had indeed become much more loyal and easier for him to control. The man thought about Natalie. He decided that she was an unusual girl and very strange, because she was able to somehow make his condition the most stable, even from the moment he was born. And indeed, when Sharon accidentally touched his hand, there was no reaction at all. So he assumed that if they were both from the same family, it did not mean that they had the same abilities. And he concluded that only Natalie could truly calm him down. This fact made the man a little wary. Soon his assistant suddenly entered the room and addressed the man. He immediately said that Lady Natalie from the Elson house had sent a gift and a letter for him. He handed the man a small, beautiful brooch and a letter that was carefully sealed. The man also said that they understood perfectly well that Roger lived a modest life. However, since it was just a brooch, he asked if it would be polite to accept it as a gesture of goodwill on her part and not refuse this gift because of his beliefs. The man, before giving his final answer, decided to first read the letter. As soon as he opened it, it was immediately written that it was intended for the Duke of Crawford, that is Roger. The girl wrote there that she decided to give him this gift in the hope that he would wear it to the ball. Of course, Natalie wrote there that he usually wears a naval uniform. However, since it was too simple, the girl believed that this brooch should ideally match it. She believed that it would be a very good gift for him. After the man read this letter, he turned to the butler, who was still waiting for an answer, and said that in that case he could leave it. His assistant simply beamed with joy. Smiling, the man said that he believed that the young lady would be incredibly pleased as soon as she found out that he had actually kept the gift for himself. Roger, meanwhile, continued reading the letter. There the girl asked if he needed anything else, because she could also send him sweets or some food as a token of gratitude. She asked him not to misunderstand. It was just a gesture from his ball partner, so he could not perceive it as charity because it was not. As soon as the man read about food and sweets, he immediately thought about the fact that on the very first day he met her with a very modest cup of tea. She was also met by a butler who was a little upset, and the man was dressed in a very modest uniform. So he assumed that the girl now believed that the man was incredibly poor and needed help with finances. Roger thought that it had been a long time since someone had done such nice things to him, so he smiled and thought that things weren't as bad as he might have thought. He even thought that it was quite pleasant, because usually they said various terrible things about the man. The man then thought that if that child had survived, she would now be about the same age as the young lady. This thought made him sad again, and the smile on his face disappeared very quickly. He lowered his head and thought that if this was not just a coincidence, then perhaps this was the price he had to pay. From that moment on, several days passed, and the very day arrived when the most long-awaited evening of the year took place, namely the Imperial Ball. When Natalie was riding in a carriage with her brother, he constantly lectured her. Anatoly told her to think again about attending this ball at all. He explained that Natalie could have easily returned and everything would have worked out. Well, the girl didn't answer him. She thought that he was being too annoying that day. He kept returning to this issue that they had already discussed a long time ago, and she thought that there would be no problems with this anymore. But she was wrong. Anatoly continued to press her. He asked if she really just wanted to see the sights of the capital. He explained that if this was really the case, then she could in any case go to the capital the following week for a transcription meeting. It was not necessary to attend this ball if she just wanted to see the surroundings. The man replied that he really couldn't understand why she wanted to go to this event so much. Then Natalie interrupted him and asked if he could just stop talking about it. She looked at her brother with an icy gaze and said that she had already said that she understood. So she would ask him now to stop constantly blaming her for all of this. And besides, she said that she never asked him to understand her at all, so she didn't see any problem with her not explaining everything to him in detail. She told him to just continue living his life ignoring her as he always did. Anatoly, hearing this, was very surprised. He was silent for a while. The guy simply did not know what to say to her about all this. He already wanted to tell her something, but at that moment Sharon suddenly put her hand on his palm and told her brother and Natalie not to quarrel again. She said that it was a very rare occasion when they all went to the Imperial Palace together. So she suggested that they just enjoy this moment because it was unknown when this could happen again. Natalie, meanwhile, looked out the window, sighed heavily, and asked why her sister was so dramatic that day, because she had once again butted into their conversation and didn't let them sort things out normally. At that time, they had already begun to drive up. And then suddenly, looking out the window, Natalie saw that Roger had already arrived. She immediately became interested and did not want to stay in the carriage with her family and friends any longer. She turned to the coachman and asked him to stop the carriage because she needed to get out at this place. Anatoly, hearing this, immediately smiled and asked if she really planned to walk from this place to the Imperial Palace, but he did not say anything else and told her to do whatever she wanted. The man on Bolo's mouth was glad that she would leave, and he would no longer have to sit next to her, but before Natalie closed the door to the carriage, she thanked her for letting her out at all. She also smiled and said that she and her brother would see each other inside. And just as she was about to go down, the man suddenly grabbed her hand and told her to wait. Natalie was surprised to hear this. However, Anatoly said that if she wanted to go to the Imperial Ball so much, he would accompany her as her partner. Therefore, he told her to immediately return back to the carriage. Sharon, meanwhile, also followed them out, and turning to her brother, she asked who would accompany her in that case, since she had not come with anyone and did not know that he would refuse to be with her. But the man replied that they could all be together. After all, they were brothers and sisters, so he didn't see that there was any big problem with this. But Natalie replied that they could have fun together, and it was already time for her to go. The girl no longer listened to her brother, who was trying to catch up with her. She thought that it really was Roger. She had already seen how he began to approach the Imperial Palace and was glad that she was not mistaken after all. The girl came closer to him. She took his hand and said hello, and said that it was very nice to see him in this place for the first time. Then she noticed that he was wearing the gift that she had sent him. Natalie smiled and also said that she knew perfectly well that it would suit him perfectly and was happy that he had accepted it. But the man calmly replied that he, of course, could not refuse a gift from his partner, so he thought it would be best to keep it for himself. Then they headed together in the other direction, and Natalie asked if he would mind if she accompanied him to the palace as his partner. Of course, Roger couldn't refuse this, so soon they got into the carriage and went to the palace together. They drove up to the imperial palace, and Natalie was a little amazed when she saw it, because it was really very large. This was the place where the crown prince lived in the game the girl was playing. The crown prince's route was the fastest and safest way to reach the ending. His character was of a gentlemanly type, so the level of his affection increased very quickly. So the girl thought that this time she needed to attract the attention of the crown prince in order to raise their relationship with him. Some time passed since then, and now they finally arrived. Roger came out first and gave the girl his hand to help her down. And when Natalie came out, she wrapped both of his palms as soon as she found herself on the ground, but she looked him straight in the eyes and said that she was ready to be under his care as an escort. Immediately after that, they entered the hall. It was quite an impressive appearance because together, this couple looked very beautiful, but at the same time unusual. As soon as they entered the hall, people immediately began to whisper to each other. They were interested in how the young lady managed to end up next to the Duke of Crawford. They immediately began to discuss all possible theories on this matter. Of course, everyone was surprised by the fact that the cold-blooded Duke of Crawford was able to bring a partner to the ball. And besides, it was the young lady Natalie. This fact surprised many even more. One of the famous ladies was very shocked. They could not believe that the same Natalie, who is called a poisonous mushroom, appeared on the floor with Roger. The girls thought that she had black hair like Lady Sharon, so they did not immediately recognize her when she appeared as a blonde. And they also thought that with her natural hair color, the girl was much more beautiful and attractive. Then one of them asked if they hadn't heard that Lady Natalie originally had light hair like the late Duchess, because many thought that black was her real hair color, but it turned out not to be so. Natalie, who was passing by them, heard all these conversations perfectly well, and in fact, she was pleased that she had now become quite the talked-about lady of that evening. They said that all this time she wore a black wig in order to look just like Sharon, and Natalie herself really believed that if she looked like the girl that everyone adored, everyone would love her too. However, now she was not going to hate her beautiful golden hair ever again. She thought it was amazing and certainly was not going to give it up ever again. As soon as they entered the hall, Roger suddenly turned to the girl and said that he would like to ask her one more thing that could not wait. He turned to the lady and asked what exactly she was trying to achieve by going so far. He was genuinely interested in what benefit she was getting out of all this. Natalie was silent for a while. She didn't know what to answer him. However, she suddenly stopped him and said that she actually wanted to be a little more honest. She said that the power of his water had not yet fully established itself. This meant that he needed her help. At that moment, the man thought that she had hit the nail on the head, but he did not understand how the girl could know all this information, because he had not told anyone about it yet. After a short silence, Roger said that if she knew this, then in that case she could stay with him for a little while longer. The girl then made a surprised expression on her face and asked if this really meant that someone had asked her for a favor. The man understood perfectly well that if he did not ask the girl properly, she could easily distance herself and leave. He definitely could not allow this, so in a gentle voice he asked her to stay with him. Suddenly, the guy turned his head to the side and saw some knights who, watching all this, began to smile. He said that he felt that someone was there and was surprised that it was them. One of the guys laughed nervously and said that they were just curious about the lady who was next to the colonel, and that was the reason they allowed themselves to behave like that. Another agreed with his partner and said that he never said that he would take such a beautiful partner with him, so they just couldn't resist and calm their curiosity. Then the knight came closer to the colonel and said that now he understood why the man was always busy. Otherwise, he had already begun to think various bad things about it. Natalie stepped aside a little. She suddenly smiled after hearing all this and thought that in fact this man got along with everyone else much better than she thought. Then she turned to the Duke and asked if the knights had come to accompany the man. However, without waiting for an answer, she told Roger to go with them. She could wait for a while. There was no problem there. He didn't have to worry about it. The girl also smiled and said that she hoped that she too would someday have a chance to talk to these knights, because she was very interested in talking to them and learning a little more in detail. Roger then looked at the knight and said that he would go with them, and also added to the girl that he would return soon. So he asked her to wait for him. Natalina began to object. She waved goodbye to all the other knights and said that she was glad to meet them, even if it was only for a short time. Then the girl thought that she also needed to go already. After all, very soon the second main C character of this game was supposed to appear, and she simply had to get to know him as soon as possible in order to gradually win his favor towards herself. In fact, the Luxor Empire had long been loved by the god of life for the empire. The god of life blessed the emperor's heir with the power of life, and he became the most famous throughout the empire. Eventually, this power was inherited by the first prince, and his name was Oman Luxor. However, he had a fatal flaw in his character. As soon as the girl returned to the banquet hall, she thought that he was probably the center of attention as always, and was already thinking of a plan on how she could get closer to him. Yet she came closer and saw a tall, fair-haired man who was politely communicating with all the ladies around him. At first glance, he really could seem like a real gentleman and a lover of women. A man bowed to one of the ladies he was talking to and said that she could do it if she wanted. He would be very flattered. Then he suddenly noticed that the face of the girl he was talking to suddenly turned red, and he asked if she had really become ill. But in fact, the aristocrat was simply very embarrassed as when talking to him. The girl immediately touched her cheeks and tried to calm down. She answered the riot police officer that this was not at all the case. Everything was fine with her, so he didn't have to worry. But the man began to show even more painful tactility. He straightened the girl's hair, wrapping it behind her ear, and told her to take care of herself. After all, if she got sick, his heart would be broken, and he certainly didn't want that. Natalie, who stood aside and watched all this, smiled and thought that his seduction of women had not changed, and it was no wonder that he was called the hesitant crown prince. However, at that moment, she suddenly heard a man who said that he definitely could not forgive the crown prince. This man was clearly very angry with him. He looked at the riot policeman with real hatred. He started to approach him and made sure that he heard his words. He said that there was still a limit to how one can look down on someone. He also said that all this man had was a pretty face and a meaningless title. He took a glass of wine and poured it straight onto the girl next to whom the crown prince was standing. He said that he couldn't believe that he even dared to kiss his bride's hand. In fact, he was going to pour this drink on the crown prince, but missed, and fortunately, his bride was able to react in time and moved away from the sight. So the liquid simply spilled on the floor and did not hit anyone. Natalie, meanwhile, came closer to him and stood between the men. She said that his greeting was rather aggressive. After that, she said that he probably missed her. She turned to young Master Arnold and asked if it was right for him to act like this. Seeing the lady, he immediately became worried. With a trembling voice, he said that he was not trying to be rude to her at all. He said that if she tells him and from which family, then he will come and apologize to them properly. Natalie, hearing this, she pretended to be offended. She asked if he really had the audacity to pretend as if he didn't recognize her. This was very surprising to her. She held out a handkerchief so that the crown prince could wipe off what had gotten on him from the drink, and said that she was surprised by the fact that he had looked at her furiously back then, and now this was his revenge. And besides, he continued to pretend as if he didn't understand what she was talking about. Smiling happily, she said that she had indeed caused him a little inconvenience, so she did not blame it on everyone. At that moment, the man was sincerely amazed. He could not believe that it was really Natalie in front of him, and he felt some awkwardness because of this whole situation. In fact, a few weeks ago, it was one of those ordinary things the girl did before she got her memories back. In a jewelry store, she saw a necklace that she really liked, and even though they said it was custom-made and not for sale, that almost made them sell it. It turned out that it was ordered directly by Arnold. It was a custom gift for his fiancée, and the girl was really mean to do it like that. Soon, when the truth was revealed in the hall, the young girl who had recently flirted with the riot police turned to Arnold and asked if it was really true that he had ordered this necklace, especially for her. However, at that moment, an evil voice was heard, which said that no matter what the young master's true intentions were, drawing too much attention to the situation would definitely not help. Arnold himself couldn't even respond to this. He stood with his head down and understood perfectly well that he had done the wrong thing and simply allowed his emotions to control him. In the end, when people heard this whole situation, they started whispering among themselves. They were really sure that this man was ready to throw wine at the crown prince. However, then, they realized that in the end, Natalie was to blame as always. They thought that she had changed. However, in the end, it turned out that these were just rumors, and she remained the same. The girl, meanwhile, turned to the crown prince and said that she had come to greet him and asked the man for forgiveness for such an unpleasant incident. After that, she smiled and asked Aean if he was ready to accept such a chaotic greeting. The man was sincerely amazed by everything that happened. He did not expect that it could have such consequences. So for some time, he simply stood and looked at the girl in surprise, as if he was seeing her for the first time in his life. But soon he smiled and said that without any doubt he was ready to accept such a greeting from the beautiful lady Natalie. After that, he extended his hand and suggested that she go to another place to talk, because it was too noisy and uncomfortable there. He said that he would like to go to a place where they would be alone and no one else would bother them. He held the girl's hand, and Natalie was very surprised by this. At one time, one of the aristocrats was very happy. She told her friend that the crown prince was incredibly kind, even to this Natalie, whom everyone considered a poisonous mushroom. However, another girl came closer to her and said that there were some rumors about him that made it difficult to adore him completely. Then the girl asked if her friend was really talking about those rumors, where it was said that you can lose all your powers if you just get close to him. But she said that Lady Natalie shouldn't be afraid of it, because she never had any powers, so they didn't have to worry. And besides, other people began to doubt that the crown princes would want to devote their precious time to a person like her. The girl even said that she had rejected her proposal, and now he was standing with a new woman. Of course, this was incredibly painful for her, and she wanted to somehow take revenge on him in this way. It was a young girl with pink hair. She stood to the side and thought that it was very low of Aean to choose that very problematic Natalie from all the possible ladies. She was even so nervous that she began to bite her fingers until they bled. In the end, she did not understand how Natalie was better than her, but then she decided that His Highness would regret such a choice, and very soon. Soon, Aean brought the girl to a secluded place on the street. It was already too dark, and for this reason, they went to the window to see at least each other. Aean said that she had suffered due to his carelessness, so he asked her to allow him to prepare a new dress for her, since this one was completely wet from the drink. Natalie, meanwhile, said that there was no real need for this, because the stain was barely noticeable, and she could live with it until the end of the evening. However, the man continued to insist on his own. He said that she would probably be very uncomfortable staying in a wet outfit for the rest of the evening, considering the fact that it had just begun. He still wanted to give her a new dress so that she would feel more comfortable, but Natalie was steadfast. She said that it was certainly not necessary, and she thought that a little night air in the garden would dry out her stain very quickly, so she wanted to go straight there. Aean decided to keep her company and said that they could take a walk together because the weather there was great for it, and he would like to keep her company. As soon as they went out into the yard, the man said that he thought that a simple walk would not be enough as an apology, and for this reason he decided to take her to an incredibly unusual but very beautiful place. It was a treasure that only a select few knew about, and the place was so special that no one could enter that place even on the night of the grand ball. Stopping, Aean smiled and said that this place was very beautiful and quiet. He really hoped that she would like it there, and that she would appreciate the sign of his apology. Natalie smiled and replied that for her it was more than a worthy payment for the incident that happened, so she was grateful to him. When the man, after a short silence, said that he had already managed to prepare himself for the drink to spill on him, however, he was pleasantly surprised that she suddenly decided to help him. Natalie, hearing this, was genuinely surprised and immediately asked if he was really prepared for this incident. The guy answered in a calm voice that this was exactly how it was. He knew perfectly well that the young gentleman Arnold had a grudge against him, and he decided that he would simply take the blow and end it. However, the fact that the girl intervened was a genuine surprise to him. Then Natalie, who was standing a few steps away from the man, asked if he really lived like that. He gave people what they wanted even if he himself felt a little uncomfortable. Aean immediately frowned. He said that apparently she understood him, and that was surprising. He also believed that it was because they were in similar situations, and only for this reason she could imagine how he was. Natalina didn't answer, so the man asked what the girl wanted from him. He understood almost immediately that she had decided to intervene for a reason. She had her own benefit from it. Smiling, she said that the man was quite perceptive. She thought that this was also a necessary skill for his survival, and for this reason he developed it greatly. Given her position, Natalie was acquainted with the crown prince. However, they were definitely not close to him. Firstly, the women who gathered at his place despised the girl. But also her closeness with him was not so great, because every time she saw him, she experienced this strange feeling of kinship with this person. It was as if he was surrounded by people, but never really among them, or the fact that he seemed overly concerned with the opinions of others, despite his high status. All this made the girl think about how similar they were, and it was like Natalie seeing herself, and that was why she felt uneasy about all this. A very large number of women adored this man just as much as they despised him, and as expected, they were all unhappy with his birth, of course. Aean was an illegitimate child who was born by the will of the emperor from a simple servant girl. This was a red spot on the man's name, and for this reason he had a very hard time. In ancient times, the empire of Luxor was blessed by the god of life. The god would bestow his blessing upon the heir worthy of the throne, usually bestowing the firstborn with the greatest power. Once, tradition required the emperor to enter into a political marriage with a princess from an allied state. He hoped that their firstborn would be able to inherit the empire. However, even after 10 years of living together, the child still had not appeared, and rumors began to spread that the god of life had left the empire, and this greatly affected their reputation. It was during the difficult years of their relationship that the emperor met Aean's mother, a new servant who came into his room completely by chance. The girl put her large suitcase on the ground and asked the gentleman for forgiveness, saying that she did not want to disturb him at all. She said that she was lost and asked if he could tell her where the servant's room was. This is how the emperor met the recently hired servant who simply walked into the garden by chance. And as soon as he looked at this beautiful blonde woman, he fell in love with her at first sight, which was not typical for a man. And like a miracle, this girl eventually conceived the emperor's first child. But the empress was not going to let the poor maid get away with it because she was offended. Before she had time to tell the emperor that she was pregnant, she was simply thrown out of the palace, where she gave birth alone outside the imperial capital. It was very difficult for her, but she coped. That same winter, her life finally ended, and she left behind only a small son who was now alone in the whole world. Thus, Aean, abandoned by all the servers, wandered through the slums until 6 years after the emperor, who had too late surrendered the truth, found him and brought him back to the palace. The woman the emperor loved bore him a son who was exactly like him, and as the firstborn, he was to have the most powerful blessing of the god of life. Despite the fact that Aean was born out of wedlock, his place could not be taken. The only problem was that by that time the empress had also already been able to give birth to children. Aean desperately waited for his sacred power to awaken. However, fate unfortunately did not spare him this time either. Eventually, it was announced that the second principal, named Harem, had awakened its power much earlier. However, Paramel's abilities were too weak for it to claim the throne. Therefore, Aemon's father decided to convince everyone to wait for the awakening of his first son. Of course, his brother did not like this turn of events at all. After all, he already hoped that he would be the heir. But this in turn played a very good game with Aeon, so the power of the second prince was really very limited, and the emperor clearly preferred Aeon more than his second son. Paramal, of course, blamed Aeon. After all, if it weren't for him, then a man could easily become the Prince of Crimea. That's why the brothers were never friends. They were always at odds with each other. But Aeon took it completely calmly. He told the guy that if he was so worried about it, then he should have been born earlier, and that would be the end of it. Paramal then asked if the guy had really tried to speak to him in such a tone without even showing his abilities. The man really didn't like the way he treated him, but he decided to be above all this. Leaving, he told Aeon that when he becomes emperor, the first thing he will do is wipe him off the face of the earth and expel him from the palace. This is how the crown prince, who was deprived of his power, and the second princess's power was not enough to rule, lived under the same roof. The tug of war between them lasted for many years. Natalie knew this information very well, so when she came closer to the man, she said that, like other ladies, he always kept his distance from her. She wondered if it was because she had no abilities that could be stolen. Haman, hearing this, smiled and asked what she was actually talking about. After all, he didn't understand. What kind of theft of ability did she mean? But the girl interrupted him and said that she knew perfectly well that he was cultivating the strength of other people and creating something close to the strength of life, so he could no longer hide. However, the girl said that she had one trump that could definitely interest him because she knew how to make him emperor. So, with a smile on her face, Natalie asked him if he had any desire to open up to her. Aean was a little surprised by what he heard. He told the girl that he didn't expect her to be like this. She said such amazing things. He also said that they call him inferior except for the prince. So he did not understand how a person like him could become an emperor because he had already tried many options. He also said that regarding the ability to absorb, it probably just seemed that way to her. So he didn't see the point in continuing this conversation further. Natalie frowned and asked if he really wasn't a particularly honest person, since he was now brazenly deceiving her to her face. The girl also asked if she should have mentioned how he had just absorbed Lady Breck's abilities. He also asked her if maybe she should remember how he used these absorbed forces to secretly resolve the crisis throughout the empire. The man couldn't believe that she was really saying all this, but he decided to stick to the theory that they didn't know at all what she was talking about. Natalie also decided to make an innocent expression on her face, and she said that she was probably really wrong. The girl was not going to put pressure on him so that he would not run away. How could she say that some people are saying that recently some areas have suffered greatly from pests, and because of this, all the crops have dried up and died? It was for this very reason that he was with the young Lady Brecht, who had the power of Flora. She believed that he intended to steal her by force in order to finally make the harvest grow and fix his problems. The man then sighed heavily and looked at her with a little hatred. He said that since she already knew so much, it was simply pointless to deny it any further. He grabbed his weapon just in case and said that no one else should know about this. So he asked if the girl had accidentally kissed the spy with her. The girl then asked in a calm voice whether he would believe her if she said that she saw all this in a dream or whether he would consider her crazy. But she explained that she had been having prophetic dreams for some time now, and that was the reason she knew this information and definitely did not use any spies. Also, Natalie, fixing her hair, said that what she saw in her dream was how he rises as an emperor, and it was for this reason that she came directly to him. In fact, it was really true that at the end of the game, Roger becomes the Archduke, and Aean becomes the emperor of this empire. The man, upon hearing this, immediately laughed and said that he could imagine that this was all true. But he also said that just because she correctly described his past, he still had no guarantee that she correctly understood his future. So he definitely could not completely trust the girl. Natalie replied that it was very difficult to believe because His Highness currently lacked power, authority, and of course influence, and she understood this. However, she wondered if there was a way to awaken his abilities so that he would tell her then. She said that if it could be rode, then she believed that in that case it would be possible to take some measures to improve it many times over. The girl looked away from him and said that she believed that he, like no one else, perfectly understood the meaning of these words. For this reason, she hoped for his support and cooperation. Even though Aean was currently the crown prince of that country, according to the genealogy, the Paramal born by the Empress was the legitimate heir. And besides, he awakened his abilities earlier than, however, Aean became the crown prince for only one reason. And all because, according to tradition, the firstborn of the emperor was the owner of the strongest life force, and he was crowned only for his potential. But he never lived up to the expectations of those around him. The Empress still insisted that it was not the ability of A to awaken her power that lay in the fact that the god of life simply took and rejected him. And she claimed that Paramal, although he had weak abilities, was nevertheless the one who should inherit the throne. However, the faith of the firstborn emperors was unwavering, and this awakened the Empress faction who planned the assassination of Aean. The current emperor was ill, and it was unknown when his death would come. And if Aean dies before he develops his abilities, then no one will stop Paramal from becoming emperor. It was for this reason that the woman believed that she could get the throne for her son and do it all in the most useful and unnoticeable way. However, before this, Aean had to prove that he was truly blessed by the god of life before this became an irreversible process, and he really needed to hurry. Natalie asked him to give her his hand, and after that, she asked if he knew a special spell that would allow her to use the ability. The man cautiously reached for her hand and said that he knew the spell, but his abilities had never manifested themselves before, so he believed that this time nothing would work. But Natalie assured him that this would definitely happen now, and she also told him to take the sword and say the word activator, which would help him do this. She looked him straight in the eyes and with a smile on her face said that this time everything would be different, because now she was with him, so he needed to believe in his abilities and begin the ritual. The man thought it wouldn't hurt to try again. Since the girl was so confident, he said special words, and at that moment, something incredible really happened. The man's abilities really began to manifest. Aean could not believe that this was all true, because this had never happened before. Natalie, meanwhile, was very happy because she said that everything was not as clear-cut as he thought, and she was also glad that she still managed to do what she promised him. However, after they stopped holding hands, Natalie noticed that his strength began to fade very quickly, and this alarmed her. The man looked at his hands and sighed heavily, saying that his level of strength was still inferior to his brother's, and asked if the god of life had really left him so quickly. He didn't understand how this was possible, but Natalie put her hand on his cheek and said that this couldn't be. After that, she asked for forgiveness and said that she needed to step away for a while. She was definitely going to increase the power of the Aean to the maximum. She believed that he did not even realize the situation and would simply continue to play at romance. That is why the girls behaved in this way. At the very same time, on the veranda not far from them, there were several men standing, all in black. They thought that now was the most opportune time to catch the prince by surprise. These were the very same hired killers. One of them said that this man was supposed to die before he could use his power, so they had to hurry. He activated his magical abilities, and in the meantime, his arrow caught fire, after which he aimed it straight at the Aemons in the hope that it would make him dead. At the moment he released the arrow, the girl stood and moved the man closer to her. Now they were separated by a few centimeters. After the explosion occurred, the man was able to react immediately. He took Natalie in his arms and tried to carry her away from there, because the stones continued to fall on them. Aean himself thought that this was all the work of a hired empress, or perhaps just another person from the group. He turned to the girl and asked for forgiveness for dragging her into all this. He also said that they only needed him, so he asked her to quickly run away from there. But Natalie said that she couldn't do it. She was half conscious. The girl pressed herself against his chest and said in a quiet voice that now he could use his abilities correctly. In fact, she remembered that initially the hero's activation word was not the one he said. Using the wrong activator word caused his powers to quickly fade away, but in reality, the activator was originally a different word, and now she knew it. The girl quickly took his hand and put it on the sword. She told him to repeat after her. After that, Natalie told him to clarify the word Borgelian. Immediately after this, something bad happened to the arrow. In fact, up until that moment, a special gas was spreading that was supposed to poison them. However, soon all this stopped. One of the assassins was about to launch another arrow in order to make sure that the crown prince would be dead, but he didn't succeed. The arrow simply took and flew out of his hand. He realized that this was probably the very same life force. However, he did not understand how this was possible because he knew that the first prince did not have such abilities. Then he was going to go further, but at that moment the plants started to spread everywhere. They captured these killers. His partner couldn't even move his leg. He didn't understand what was happening, and this was his scarecrow. At that moment, Aean was genuinely amazed. He could not believe that this had never happened again and assumed that his ability had actually appeared somehow. But at that moment, Natalie took his hand again and smiling asked if he believed her now. And she also said that she would do everything to ensure that he would still become emperor. The man sighed heavily and said that it was very kind of her to speak with such confidence. However, letting her go from his arms, he said that she could have made someone else an emperor, not just him. Therefore, he wanted to know why she decided to choose him. He said that there were too many difficulties around his personality, and this would only complicate her task. But Natalie replied that if she said that she also saw everything in a dream, she would definitely lose his trust. She explained that many people took her for a poisonous mushroom or a crow, and they also whispered about Aean, calling him a defective crown prince of low birth. Natalie explained that she was sure that he would understand her if she said that she wanted to prove the opposite, that all these people who said terrible things about them were wrong. But first of all, she wants to prove to herself that she can do it, and she hopes that Aean will be able to do it as well. Natalie turned around and started walking back into the hall. She said that, to put it simply, she just wanted to strike back at these people and prove that they were definitely fools, since they were considered weak. At that moment, Aean laughed sincerely. He really liked the girl's way of thinking, so he smiled and said that this was a very convincing explanation, and it suited him. However, after that, he suddenly approached her with very quick steps, grabbed the girl by the waist, pulled her closer to him, and asked if she agreed to become closer to each other than anyone else. The girl, having heard about the close relationship, was immediately very surprised. She did not answer him for some time. She definitely did not expect this. Natalie then thought about the fact that in order to safely fall out of this game, she needed one of the main male characters who could stand on her side. She understood that it was quite natural that they would need to get closer, and this was entirely a part of her plans for this reason. The girl believed that this would be simply the perfect move to advance in her game. So, plucking up her courage, Natalie reached out to the man closer. She put her hand on his face and said that everything was right, and also asked if it was true that when they became closer, they would be able to communicate freely. Aean even blushed a little. In fact, he did not expect that she would agree so easily and quickly. But smiling, the man said that, of course, this is exactly so. At that moment, the girl began to examine his appearance. She became much friendlier, and the girl noticed that this is exactly how the man looked when he was relaxed. She liked this expression on his face. The last long silence, the man also said that he heard that the girl from next week will start visiting the palace for meetings of census takers. Natalie said that this is indeed true information. And the guy, even more embarrassed, suddenly giggled and said that this made him happy, because in that case, they shouldn't have any problems with meetings for some time. At that moment, Natalie thought that if someone saw this scene, they would definitely think that they were lovers, because that was exactly how he behaved. But she hoped that there was no catch in these words. The man straightened her hair, removing it from her face, and continuing to smile, said that he would be happy to continue their conversation. However, after what happened, the nights were about to approach. He looked around and saw that there were indeed 2 hired killers lying unconscious not far from them. But they were supposed to be taken away soon, so he wasn't worried. Aean told the girl that first they would be tortured to death, and after that they would be executed directly in prison. As soon as he started talking about this, his facial expression quickly changed and he became very serious. After that, he wiped the dirt from the girl's face and told Natalie that he would make sure that from now on, none of her dresses would be damaged because of him. He also said that he would definitely make sure that no one would hurt her again under any circumstances, after which he took her hand and kissed it tenderly. Natalie smiled and said that in that case she would look forward to it, and after what happened, they returned back to the palace. At that very moment, Roger was at a rather important meeting where they were discussing the topic of reforming the imperial army for the next year. The man sat next to his colleagues and did not understand how it was possible to listen to all this calmly. He was very uninterested in it, and it all irritated him. But Roger was happy that Natalie came with him. He very much doubted that he would have been able to endure this evening if it weren't for her. He understood that if he lost control of his power, when he became very angry and fell into it in front of the emperor, then instead of just sitting at the meeting, he would be immediately executed for treason. But this meeting was really very important, so he was happy that he was able to endure it and got to it in the end. At this point, the discussion continued. However, suddenly the butler ran in. He turned to the emperor and said that very unpleasant events had occurred that needed to be reported urgently. The guy ran closer to the desk and said that the imperial barrier had detected a threat. As soon as the men heard this, they immediately became worried and started talking to each other. One of the main ones suddenly left his place and asked the butler who was able to activate his power at all. The man replied that there was a strong explosion in the garden and they threw the programmer there. There they discovered that the attackers were already unconscious. Therefore, unfortunately, they did not know the detailed information. Roger, having heard all this information, immediately thought about the fact that Natalie, together with the crown prince, were heading to the garden, and this interested him very much. At that very moment, the emperor entered the banquet hall, and everyone immediately began to greet him with loud applause and shouts of blessing. After this, the emperor was informed that on this day, a very unfortunate incident had occurred. On the back of the hands of the attackers who were found in the garden, they found the emblem of an enemy country. One of the army leaders said that this worried him a lot, and the emperor himself became interested in how they managed to get into the palace at all, since they had strong security. He also said that in a normal situation, he would have already executed everyone for failing to fulfill their duties to protect the palace. However, since they were unable to cause them much harm, he decided to show mercy. The emperor said that he was waiting for a full report from the knights on how the mercenaries of the enemy country were able to penetrate their territory. He turned to his subordinates and asked if they understood him. They all immediately said that this was indeed so, but after that, the second son of the emperor suddenly appeared and said that he had very important news. Roger immediately noticed him, but the guy continued his conversation and said that before the uninvited guests were discovered, the first prince had already been in the garden for quite a long time. Also, with a smile on his face, Aemon's brother said that he was right there at the time of the attack, but he did not receive a single scratch and asked if it seemed very suspicious to them in such a situation. People at that moment immediately began to whisper among themselves. They believed that this was really so. The middle prince left the banquet hall at that moment, and soon after that, there was a loud explosion that even they heard. The emperor then turned directly to the paramour and asked if he could confirm this in any way so that it would not be just empty talk. But at that moment, Aeon himself stepped forward. He said that he could answer instead of him. The guy turned to everyone present and said that during the banquet, Lady Natalie's dress had gotten dirty because in order for him to be able to escort her to the living room, they had to go through the garden. And at the time of the attacker's fall, the girl and he received quite serious injuries. At that moment, he was walking with Natalie. He grabbed her by the shoulder and accompanied her. Aeon said that Lady Natalie could confirm his words that he was definitely not a spy, so they didn't need to worry about it. After that, he looked at his brother with contempt and asked if the second prince now understood what had really happened. At that moment, the emperor suddenly began to cough violently. He already wanted to say his answer. However, he could not because the cough did not even stop for some time. The man's assistant immediately ran up to him, turned to His Highness and asked why he had come to this place at all, and told the man that he should have been resting some more. But the emperor, rising from his seat and continuing to cough, said that they should make sure that the traitor was found and punished as an example and a threat. After the emperor walked out the door, Natalie looked at the crown prince and noticed that he was very worried about his father's health. Therefore, the girl immediately told the man that everything was fine with her. Now everything was fine, so he could go after his father if he was worried. The guy sighed heavily and said that it was very hard for him to see him in such a state, and as a gentleman he had to accompany the girl properly until the end. He also said that he was very sorry that everything turned out this way in the end. Aeon moved closer to Natalie and hugged her, saying that he would soon find time just for them, and then they would definitely be able to talk as much as they needed. But at that moment, the girl, completely unexpectedly, felt someone grab her hand. Natalie was a little wary because it happened very abruptly. But after that, she heard Roger's voice, who did just that. He thanked the crown prince for looking after the lady in his absence, and then said that now he could take care of his partner himself. Natalie, hearing these words, was very surprised. In fact, she had already completely forgotten about Roger while she was resolving matters with the crown prince. The girl turned to Duke Crawford and said that she had special reasons for being with Aeon, so she asked him not to attach too much importance to it. But she didn't even have time to finish her sentence, because Aeon spoke first and asked Roger if he shouldn't have been more polite to the lady. Smiling maliciously, he said that leaving the girl alone at the banquet is definitely not the action of a gentleman who deserves attention from Lady Natalie. Roger, hearing this, immediately frowned and asked the crown prince if he really loved to chat so much, even after he had put the unfortunate girl in danger. The girl, meanwhile, was very surprised. She did not understand why they suddenly started to quarrel like that. After all, she certainly could not have foreseen this. But soon Aeon sighed heavily and said that Roger spoke as if there was something between them. However, he was absolutely sure that this was not the case. Roger moved closer to the girl and asked why he thought so. After all, they give each other what each needs, so he believed that this could be considered their close relationship. Aeon continued to behave quite calmly, but at the same time it seemed as if he was jealous. He sighed and said that Roger turned out to be a very unexpected rival for him. After that, he explained to the man that the lady was also important to him, and given the current situation, this time he still decided to retreat and not make her worry even more. Before leaving, he waved to Natalie and said that next time he would definitely have to take a ticket to get in line in order to get to the girl, because she was apparently quite popular among men. After he left, Natalie looked at Roger, who still looked very angry. She didn't expect that these two people would start arguing like little children, and because of this, she definitely didn't foresee such a situation. She also thought that perhaps it would be best for her not to let these two see each other too often in the future, because it could end very badly. She thought about the fact that when the level of sympathy between the main male characters is the same, they can start fighting to the death to get the heroine, and this can lead in turn to a very bad ending. Then suddenly Roger interrupted her thoughts. He grabbed the girl by the waist and, placing her palm on his chest, asked his lady if she was ready to give him a little attention, since he was her companion. The girl immediately shook her head and asked what exactly he wanted to do, and the man immediately answered that he had heard from people that they were together in the garden, and he also asked if she had been injured anywhere. Roger was really worried about Natalie, but she said that she actually fell a little. However, she was fine, so he shouldn't worry about it at all. But the man replied that he could not do this because he was now her partner, at least for this evening. So he simply had to make sure that everything was okay with her. He said that apparently quite a lot of different events had happened after he had left. But looking intently at the girl, Roger also added that he had heard that Arnold had poured guilt on her. Then he looked at her dress and said that she knew better than anyone else that people had such shortcomings that he simply hated, and because of this, he would like to take care of the girl so that this evening would go well for her. Natalie tried to calm him down. She said that the stain was almost completely dry, so she was fine. However, at that moment, Roger suddenly handed her a small handkerchief. He said that he was very ashamed of leaving her, and that was all he could offer her at that moment. As soon as the girl saw this, she immediately smiled. She thought that Roger might seem stupid at first, but he has a rather unexpected sweet side. Then the girl suddenly raised her head up and saw that his affection scale towards her began to grow a little, and this surprised her a little. She suddenly decided to check if something would change after she showed physical contact with him. So the girl ran her hand over his cheeks. The man immediately became very serious. He did not understand why she did this. Roger took her hand and asked if there was something wrong with his face, since she had started wiping something there so carefully. But the girl smiled coquettishly and said that this was not the case at all. There was a speck of dust on him, so she simply decided to remove it so that it would not cause him discomfort. The girl herself thought about the fact that this scoreboard had never appeared before, so she was very interested in what could have caused this statistic to appear and how she could increase it. However, the fact remained a fact. This table appeared at the right time, because the game thus reminded her that this was all a fictional world, and the girl thought it was funny. Natalie was really happy that there were such reminders. After all, she had the chance that she could forget about it again. But at that moment, something unexpected happened. Natalie's brother suddenly approached them. He turned to Lord Crawford and told him to immediately let go of the girl's hand. Natalie immediately looked at her brother Anatoly in surprise. She didn't understand what he was doing there at all, and most importantly, why he decided to interfere in her affairs. But Anatoly took his sister's hand from Roger and started yelling at him, saying that his sister had already been through a lot while her partner was away somewhere. Now that the man had finally returned, he couldn't believe that the first thing he did was initiate unnecessary contact with the skin. Natalie, who was standing behind her brother, did not understand what he was doing at all. He appeared now only to get angry and shout. She even thought that after this, her raised level of affection would certainly fall. She would really like Anatoly to continue to ignore her as before, because now he just took and ruined everything for her. Therefore, the girl turned to her brother and asked what right he had to say that. Anatoly looked at her in surprise, not understanding what she meant. But the girl explained that she believed that he had been spending time with Sharon, completely forgetting about her. And for some reason now he suddenly decided to remember that his second sister was also at this ball. She also said that now that he showed up here when everything was over and started blaming other people, she asked if he thought it was a bit shameless on his part to do that. Anatoly looked at her with irritation. He didn't understand why she decided to start this conversation at all, and in such a convenient tone. However, Roger suddenly approached the girl. He put his hands on her shoulders and said that this was enough. He wanted to stop her. The man explained to her that it was indeed true that he had failed to take care of Natalie properly, although he was her partner, so it was okay if she didn't want to take his side. Moving closer to her, he also said in a quiet voice that he thought it would be better if they stopped arguing in front of everyone and resolved this conflict soon after. Natalie at that moment thought that he was really right. All the people who were standing around were watching all this, and thus she was only making the situation worse. So she turned to her brother and said that she had been too harsh and asked him to forgive her for it. If this is what she said, she would ask His Highness to accompany her home, and her brother could stay there and spend even more time with Sharon. But Anatoly suddenly grabbed her hand and told her not to behave like a child. He looked at her with disgust and said that her father said that he would take her himself, so he asked her not to be naughty. Anatoly also explained that the man was very worried as soon as he found out that the girl had been attacked, so he wanted to make sure that she was really okay. Natalie was very surprised to hear this. It was hard for her to believe that her father could really worry about her. Natalie did not understand at all why all the characters began to act inappropriately. They simply began to interfere with her, and this girl was irritated. She sighed heavily and said that she had already said that she would go with Roger, so she asked her brother to let go of her hand. She said that it was very unpleasant and painful for her. She then turned to Roger and said that she had enjoyed spending time with him. However, she would like to invite him to meet next time and would not like him to accompany her. The man frowned slightly, but he said in a calm voice that he would definitely repay her for failing to fulfill his duties as her partner. Natalie smiled and said that he should be ready, because in that case she would definitely use his services completely. But in fact, it sounded more like a joke. Anatoly, who had gone to fetch his sister, turned to His Highness and asked Roger to allow him to say one last thing. The man did not object, and then he asked him to refrain from further interaction with their family. He certainly would not want him to cross paths with his sister ever again. She looked at him with a stern look and said that she remembered what happened several years ago at the Crawford estate. Therefore, he should not forget about it either. He said that he himself was present at the funeral that day. Anatoly said that the rumors were the most terrible about the Crawford family. As the only survivor, Roger should know better than anyone else how dangerous and terrible all this could be. Before he finally left, he told the man that he definitely did not want this tragedy to happen again in their house. And he also hoped that the man understood him perfectly and therefore believed him. Roger, meanwhile, quietly said that Anatoly had not changed at all. In fact, the young Hertz's affection as a girl remained quite strong. Even in childhood, they had a strong emotional connection. After Natalie and her brother went outside, Anatoly said that he had to talk to her and asked her to stay a little while. The girl, hearing this, was a little surprised. She turned to him and told her brother that she had nothing to talk about with him at all, so she didn't want him to detain her. However, Anatoly asked when she would finally grow up. It was clear that he was very angry. The man came closer to her and said that he did not understand whether she really thought that they would tolerate her selfish behavior towards all of them for a very long time. Natalie, hearing this, was very indignant. She started yelling at him and asked what this was supposed to mean. She also said that Anatoly was actually the only one who continued to accuse her. She didn't even let him say a word and continued her conversation. The girl said that it didn't matter at all what she was doing. Anatoly continued to be angry, pushed her away, and acted as if he sincerely hated her with all his soul. And now she is even more surprised by the fact that the guy really wants her to be kind to him. She asked if he considered this request shameless. But the man asked if she even knew what he and his father had given up for him. At that very moment, his father came out into the street. He interrupted him and told Anatoly to stop already. He looked at his son with particular anger and said that if he did not want to disgrace this family further, then he should shut up already. He also said that she had already told Anatoly several times to watch his behavior in public places. However, for some reason, these mistakes continued. Natalie's brother immediately calmed down. He asked his father for forgiveness and said that this would definitely not happen again. But at that moment, the man came closer to him and said that they would talk about it later. He asked him to take and bring Sharon. They had to leave already. After this, the father turned to Natalie and asked her to get into the carriage already. The girl was not going to say anything more. She understood that the tense atmosphere would only get worse in that case. Meanwhile, her father also went with her to the carriage. The girl felt very awkward being alone with him, but she was very interested in what he was going to tell her at all. As soon as they got into the carriage, Natalie smiled and turned to her father and said that she probably would have been better off going with her brother for Sharon. However, the man suddenly said in a stern voice that she should not make up any more excuses. She just needed to sit peacefully. He had something that he wanted to ask her about. At that very moment, the emperor was in his chambers. He was really feeling very bad. He turned to Aean and said that they had not spent time together for a long time. He said that there were people who politicized even the simple question of his well-being, and that is precisely why he had to keep the station from his own son, which he felt very sorry about. The man sighed heavily and asked what was the point of being an emperor if he couldn't even see his own son. After that, he told Aean that he was truly incredibly sorry that this had happened. The guy looked at his father and said that everything was fine. There were no problems with that because he understood it perfectly well. He also said that the man simply needed to stay healthy. That was the most important thing at that moment. The emperor then looked at his son and said that if you think about it, it was I who started the tree in the garden and returned to life. He told Aean that his mother and he loved to spend time under this tree. They would meet there quite often and enjoy each other's company. Therefore, he thanked his dear son for the fact that he was able to revive him. For him, this was really very important. After this, the emperor asked how long he was going to keep it a secret. After all, if he revealed the information that he had another ability, he would be able to get more support from those around him. He tried to explain to his son that in this way he could win a better place for himself, but Aean replied that his father really knew all this, and it surprised him a little. But the guy said that he was not ready for this yet. He wanted to wait a little while to practice until he was finally completely confident in himself. The father did not try to persuade him otherwise. He only advised the man not to think about it for too long because he was afraid that in the end he could end up like a rat that got into a cage. Smiling, he said that he would keep it in his mind. However, the father did not need to worry for a while. He tried. There they talked, and after that, he left him alone. When Aean went out the door, he saw his brother who was already waiting for him. His boyfriend smiled mockingly and asked what he was talking about with the emperor so late at night. He also said that given how his father had fortunately failed him, he was wondering if he had used some kind of dirty trick to turn the situation in his favor. Aean looked at him. His son said mockingly that the guy should have known better about the various scams and asked why he didn't just admit that he was really jealous that his father was paying more attention to his first son. Harem suddenly laughed and said that it was really very funny. He did not understand why he had to envy some son who came from a low-born woman. After that, he walked past him and told him to just tell him who the young lady was, who was standing next to him a little earlier. He explained to Aean that no noble woman would ever fall in love with a talentless freak like him, and in the end, this girl would still belong to him. So he asked his brother why he didn't give her away already. Aean was not at all affected by these words. He asked if the guy could not even remember the people who were present at the ball, and he also said that he probably spent so long on the battlefield that his brain simply turned into muscles and therefore could not even remember basic information. Harem continued to insult him. He said that unlike someone who only knows how to flirt with women, he can at least fight in battle. So he asked him to simply say who that girl was. Well, Aean didn't intend to do this. He said that he wouldn't name her because Harem already knows him very well. After all, it was he who gave her the nickname of the Crow. As soon as the guy heard this, he felt a little uneasy and immediately asked if the girl who was next to him earlier was really Natalie. It was crazy for him, but Aean said that he would be lucky if she only gave him a slap in the face. If she was going to slap him in the face, he would like the guy to warn him about it in advance, because Aean would really like to see this spectacle. The guy was starting to get angry. He thought that his brother was a real idiot, but what irritated him most was the fact that he never lost when it came to arguments. And that meant that all of this was true. Then he wondered if this girl really was Natalie. A smile suddenly appeared on his face, and he thought that she had really changed quite a lot in their last meeting. Harem knew that she always wore a black wig, so he never even imagined that she could have such long, beautiful blonde hair. He also thought that her behavior had become very elegant and confident. She really was not at all like her old version of herself. Harem also suggested that his brother probably showed interest in this girl, but he was just going to take her for himself because she became very interesting to him. He thought about the fact that in this imperial palace, he could not get absolutely anything. However, he still wanted to get this girl and believed that for him, this would be the greatest victory. He also wanted to make Aean feel terrible and believed that he would succeed. Natalie, meanwhile, continued to sit in the carriage with her father. She thought about the fact that she felt very awkward because too many years had passed since the last time they were alone together. But fortunately for her, this silence was broken by her father himself, who turned to the girl and said that she really did bring trouble wherever she went. Natalie didn't think that the conversation would go in this direction. However, she immediately said that what happened that day was not her fault at all, so she did not understand why he began to blame her. However, she also said that if he was still going to scold her and put all the blame on her, then she would like to ask for forgiveness in advance so as not to waste time. However, at that moment, after a short silence, the man suddenly asked in a quiet voice if she had been wounded anywhere. Natalie was very surprised when she heard about this, but she immediately said that she just tripped a little, so everything was fine with her, nothing serious happened. Then she wondered if he was really worried about her health or if this was another mockery of her. But the father continued their conversation and asked if she had finally decided not to wear her black wig. He was interested. Natalie didn't close herself off from him and said that it was true that she believed that she didn't need him now, but she couldn't even look her father in the eye. The man sighed heavily and said that after so much time he had already forgotten how much she resembled her mother. As soon as Natalie heard this, she was shocked because he had never spoken about her mother after the funeral. It was a taboo topic. She thought about how her light and shiny hair made him return all these memories of his wife, and the girl thought about how much pain it was for him now. But she decided to change the subject and asked her father how Sharon was. The man said that at that time she was undergoing treatment, so everything should be fine with her. He explained that she had suddenly fainted during the ball, and for this reason a doctor had gone to examine her to check if everything was okay with her. Hearing this, the girl immediately thought about the fact that everything was very strange, especially the fact that they continued to come to her when Sharon was sick. She thought that they would give her all their attention and forget about the girl. However, the father suddenly put his hand on his head as if it was hurting badly. He said that he did not want any more worries, so he asked her not to tire her father. The man was really sincere with her. He said that she didn't even know how much Anatoly worked and that he wanted her punishment to be as mild as possible, so he wanted her to finish her work quietly and without problems. After that, he asked that when her work was finished, she continue to stay at home and behave like a mouse. After all, it would be better for everyone. When he asked Natalie if she understood everything, the girl only sighed heavily and said that she would do everything in her power. She had no choice but to agree. Some time passed since then, and now they all finally returned to the estate. Anatoly arrived first because he was riding in a different carriage. And when his father and Natalie finally returned, he went out to meet his dad. Natalie looked at Anatoly and thought that she would actually prefer more stupidity from her brother than this terrible silent journey with her father. Since the man did not answer his son, she turned to them and said that she was already going to rest, so she said that he could get all the explanations from his brother. Then the butler spoke. He came out to the master and said that they called all the doctors of the capital, like a man, and ordered them to examine Sharon thoroughly and find the cause. Natalie, as soon as she heard about this, was a little surprised. She thought that Sharon must have really gotten seriously ill this time, since that's what happened. And when the girl was about to go to her room, her father suddenly turned to her and said that he would send a doctor, so he would like her to be ready to meet him in the room. The girl, hearing that they were also supposed to bring her to the doctor, was very surprised. But during that time, she had managed to change her clothes and was already sitting at the chair where the doctor began to examine her. The doctor turned to Natalia and said that they needed to check her blood pressure, so she just had to extend her hand. The girl continued to insist on her own and said that she was completely fine, so she did not understand why all this was necessary. The doctor tried to explain to her that for a more accurate diagnosis, he had to do this, but Natalie was furious. She said that she didn't understand. How many times did she have to repeat that she was okay for him to leave her alone already? The man was very worried at that moment. He understood that he had to fulfill his duty. However, when a patient disturbs him, it is almost impossible. He turned to Miss and said that anger is the root of all diseases, so he would like her to calm down. Natalie calmed her voice a little and said that this anger appeared because he continued to diagnose her and prescribe medications to a completely healthy person. At the same time, the maids who were next to her asked when she would like to take a bath. She also said that the master ordered her to wash again in her room, so they prepared everything necessary. There were many different servants and maids around her, and all this irritated her madly because she just wanted to rest peacefully. But everyone was so concerned about her that she couldn't even be alone with her thoughts. In the end, from the moment that terrible test took place, for a whole week she was not allowed to take a single step outside her room, and this, of course, tired the girl out. At first, she thought that they were just afraid of some kind of attack. However, now she knew for sure that people were just trying to take her away from meeting Roger, and that was the reason why she was locked in a room and simply not allowed to go anywhere. The girl considered this situation incredibly funny, but at the same time stupid. Anatoly himself argued with his father quite often. And then one day he came into his father's office and said that he could no longer do this. He asked how much longer he had to stand there and watch the children suffer. But the father suddenly asked in an alarmed voice, "Has the man really completely forgotten that all this was for the sake of his children?" In fact, allowing Aean to remain sick and turn away from Natalie's desire to pay attention to him can thus protect his sisters. So the man asked Anatoly not to forget about this and take this factor into account. Anatoly was still irritated by all this. He said that if they weren't happy, then he didn't understand what the point of all this was. The father heard this phrase and immediately looked at his son in surprise and asked what he meant when he said that he didn't understand what the meaning was. He wondered if Anatoly had already forgotten that his naive sympathy had almost cost his sisters their lives once. As soon as Anatoly remembered that moment from childhood, he immediately broke out in a sweat. These were very unpleasant memories, and he did not want them to return. But the father saw that the man had nothing more to say and replied that the conversation was already over. So he told him to just leave already. When Anatoly went out the door, the man was left alone. He went to his desk and picked up a photograph of where his beautiful late wife was. Looking at her, he thought that he had fulfilled her dying wish and taken Sharon, so he hoped that she was happy. He didn't know if she could have foreseen that everything would turn out this way. Was all this really part of her insidious plan in the first place? It was very disturbing. He didn't know what he should do in such a case if he misunderstood his wife's intentions and simply made the wrong choice, and this whole situation as a whole scared him quite a lot. In the end, for the entire next week, neither her father nor Anatoly came to visit Natalie, and the girl simply began to go crazy, locked alone in the room.